Chapter 0, Horizon's Edge, by Arthur F. Iceley. Artwork description. A vibrant, retro-futuristic illustration of a sleek Federation scout ship gliding through the cosmos. The spacecraft is bathed in soft, glowing starlight and features elegant, streamlined design reminiscent of 1960s sci-fi aesthetics. In the background, a vivid swirl of nebulae and distant galaxies hint at the vast expanse of uncharted territory ahead. The ship's destination, a lush, alien world with hints of blue oceans and verdant landscapes, looms large in the foreground, promising adventure and discovery. Chapter 1, Beacon in the dark, the Vigilance bridge hummed with a steady, comforting rhythm, the sound of her engines throbbing like a heartbeat through the deck plates. The night cycle bathed the control panels in a soft, blue glow, casting elongated shadows that danced with the subtle vibrations of the ship. The air was cool and carried the faint, recycled scent of ozone and metal, a smell as familiar to Commander Jay Corbett as his own reflection. Jay's boots clicked softly on the grating as he made his way from the lift to the command console. His fingers traced the edge of the worn control panel, feeling the grooves etched by years of use. He punched in a sequence of commands, and the console beeped obediently, spitting out a steaming cup of coffee from the integrated dispenser. No synthetic creamer for him. He liked it black and bitter, just like his memories of Earth. The bridge was dim but not silent. The low murmur of background noise, hisses of ventilation, distant clanks from the engineering decks below, was punctuated by the occasional beep of a diagnostic check or the soft whir of a console powering down for the cycle. Jay took a sip of his coffee, the hot liquid grounding him as he scanned the displays. "Vigilant status report," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. A holographic interface flickered to life above the command console, displaying a myriad of data streams. Jay's gaze flicked over them with practiced ease. Engine efficiency at 98%, life support nominal, shields at full capacity. He knew these specs by heart. They were as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. "Jay," the voice was soft but insistent. Zara Chen, communications officer and the youngest member of the crew, sat at her station, eyes still heavy with sleep. Her fingers danced over the comm panel, tracing patterns only she understood. "What is it, Zara?" Jay asked, setting his coffee down on the console's edge. Zara leaned back, rubbing her temples. "I picked up something on long-range sensors, an anomaly." Jay's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he kept his tone neutral. "Anomaly, define anomaly." "Signal," Zara clarified. "It's faint, but it's strange, ancient frequency. Encryption matches pre-expansion era codes." Jay's grip on the console tightened ever so slightly. Pre-expansion era, 300 years ago, when humanity was still learning to crawl among the stars. Before the Federation, before regulations and protocols. When exploration meant danger and discovery in equal measure. "Play it," Jay said, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara's fingers flew over the controls again, and a harsh, crackling sound filled the bridge. The signal was garbled, distorted by time and distance, but there was no mistaking the rhythm. A distress call. Jay listened intently, the coffee forgotten in his hand. His mind raced through possibilities, wreckage of an old colony ship, perhaps, or a long-forgotten outpost. Whatever it was, it had been calling for help for centuries. "Coordinates?" he asked finally. Zara's eyes met his, reflecting the blue glow of her console. "Lyra VII system." Jay nodded slowly, already making up his mind. Lyra VII, a fringe sector barely charted, full of unknowns. Against regulations, but that had never stopped him before, not when there was a chance to make a difference. "Alert Kai," Jay said, turning towards the lift. "Tell him to meet me in engineering." Zara looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. "Jay, are you sure? We could be walking into—" "I know what I'm doing, Zara." Jay's voice was firm but gentle. He stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the tension beneath his fingers. "But we need to be smart about it." Zara nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her gaze. "I'll alert him," she said softly. Jay made his way back to the lift, his steps echoing through the dimly lit bridge. As he descended towards engineering, he felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, part anticipation, part caution. This was why he'd joined the Scouts. For moments like this, when the unknown beckoned and duty demanded they answer. The engineering deck buzzed with an entirely different rhythm than the bridge. Here, the hum of machinery was louder, more insistent. The air tasted of oil and metal, a sharp contrast to the sterile atmosphere above. Kai Akaffer stood amidst the chaos, his broad shoulders hunched over a diagnostic panel, hands stained with grease. "Akaffer," Jay called out, stepping onto the catwalk that circled the deck. "We've got a situation." Kai glanced up, his dark eyes reflecting the harsh glare of the engineering consoles. He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag before tucking it into his tool belt. "What's up, Commander?" Jay filled him in as they walked through the labyrinth of machinery, the noise around them a constant thrum. Kai listened intently, his expression unreadable. 300 years old?" he asked when Jay finished. "That's some serious history." "We need to check it out," Jay said, stopping by the main engine console. The hum here was louder, more intense, like standing next to a beast ready to pounce. "I want full diagnostics on our systems. Make sure we're in top condition for whatever's out there." Kai leaned against the console, crossing his arms. "And what exactly are we expecting? A ghost ship?" Jay smiled thinly. "Could be, or it could be something more. Either way, someone's been calling for help for 3 centuries. We owe it to them to find out why." Kai's expression softened slightly, a rare hint of vulnerability in his eyes. He knew better than anyone the risks they took out here on the fringe. He'd patched up enough hull breaches and repaired enough broken systems to understand the dangers. But he also understood Jay's unyielding sense of duty. "You're sure about this?" Kai asked, his voice barely audible over the engine's hum. Jay met his gaze steadily. "I wouldn't ask if I wasn't." Kai nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. Then, with a final glance at the consoles around them, he turned back to Jay. "What do you need from me?" "Full power to engines," Jay replied. "We're setting course for Lyra VII." As Kai began barking orders to his team, Jay made his way back up to the bridge. The lift doors slid open with a hiss, revealing Zara still at her station, fingers tapping nervously on the console. "We're heading out," Jay announced, striding towards the command chair. "Kai's got engineering prepping for full burn." Zara looked up, relief mingling with lingering concern in her eyes. "The course is plotted," she said, activating the navigation display. A holographic map flickered to life above the console, tracing a path through uncharted space towards Lyra VII. Jay settled into his chair, fingers dancing over the controls as he initiated the maneuver. The Vigilant shivered under him, her engines roaring louder as she began to bank towards the new coordinates. Through the viewport, the stars shifted, their pinpricks of light stretching into trails as they changed direction. "All hands," Jay's voice echoed through the comm system, steady and calm. "This is Commander Corbett. We've received an unusual signal from Lyra VII. We're altering course to investigate. Stand by for further instructions." A chorus of acknowledgments crackled over the comm, each one a testament to the trust his crew placed in him. Jay felt a surge of pride. This was more than just a mission. It was a family venture. The Vigilant groaned as she pushed deeper into the unknown, her hull vibrating with the strain of full burn. Jay watched the stars through the viewport, their cold light washing over his face. This was what he lived for, the frontier, wild and untamed. Not out of recklessness, but out of a deep-seated belief that exploring meant not just discovering new worlds, but also answering the calls of those who had come before. As Lyra VII grew closer on the sensor display, Jay leaned back in his chair, taking another sip of his now-cold coffee. The taste was bitter, grounding him amid the swirl of possibilities ahead. Whatever waited for them in that distant system, they would face it together, with courage born of curiosity and a shared sense of duty. The Vigilant surged forward through the cosmos, her engines singing a song of determination as she carved a path towards the enigmatic beacon. The crew moved with purposeful efficiency, Kai overseeing the engine room, Zara fine-tuning their sensors, each member knowing their role in this dance on the edge of charted space. Jay watched them all, feeling a profound sense of unity. This was more than just a job. It was a calling, and he knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it with the same optimism and resolve that had defined humanity's journey among the stars for centuries. The night cycle shifted to day as Lyra VII loomed larger on their displays. The hum of engines became a steady roar, vibrating through every deck plate. Jay stood, his gaze fixed on the viewport where the distant system glowed like a promise. Whatever secrets it held, they would uncover them together, boldly stepping into the unknown with hearts open and spirits unbroken. And so, the Vigilant pressed onward, her course set for the horizon's edge, where stars whispered tales of old and new adventures awaited amidst the vast, uncharted expanse. Chapter 2. Sterile skies. The hum of Federation Central Command was a symphony of ordered chaos, a vast orchestra tuned to the frequency of efficiency. Dr. Elara Wynn moved through the labyrinthine corridors with the precision of a metronome, her heel boots clicking in staccato rhythm against the polished permacrete floors. Her dark hair was swept into a severe bun, not a strand out of place, mirroring the stark neatness of her crisp inspector's uniform. Her quarters were as she had left them, sparse, functional, and spotlessly clean. A single bunk, a desk with a built-in data terminal, and a small hollow frame displaying a static image of her late parents on their wedding day. No personal effects cluttered the space, just an array of neatly arranged files and reports on the edge of her desk, each one a testament to her disciplined mind. Elara's fingers danced over the terminal's interface, pulling up Commander Jay Corbett's service record for the third time since receiving her dispatch. She scanned the data with clinical detachment, her sharp analytical eyes absorbing every detail. Commendations for exceptional bravery under fire, citations for breaches of protocol, and a litany of frontier colonies singing his praises. Her expression remained neutral, but a faint crease formed between her eyebrows, a minute betrayal of the curiosity she refused to acknowledge. The dispatch had been clear. Intercept Corbett, assess his judgment, file a report. 3 days round trip. The mission was straightforward, yet the undercurrent of disapproval from command was palpable. This wasn't a routine inspection. It was a reprimand disguised as an assignment. Elara understood the political nuances. Command wanted her to deliver a message without seeming heavy-handed. She strapped into the courier ship's pilot's seat, the leather creaking softly under her precise movements. The ship was a sleek vessel designed for speed and efficiency, its interior as sterile as a surgical suite. Panels of glowing controls hummed to life at her touch, displaying navigational charts and system diagnostics with cold precision. Elara inputted her course parameters with practiced ease, double-checking each coordinate against her mission briefing. The courier ship shuddered slightly as it disengaged from the docking clamps, then glided smoothly out of Central Command's hangar bay. Nova Prime receded into a swirl of white stars, the core world's brilliance fading into the endless expanse of space. During the journey, Elara maintained her meticulous routine. She logged her observations in concise, measured entries, documenting everything from fuel consumption rates to minor fluctuations in the ship's life support systems. Her notes were a symphony of data points, each one contributing to the larger composition of her report. Her meals were taken at prescribed intervals, nutritive rations consumed with methodical chewing and precise swallows. Sleep came in regulated cycles, 8 hours precisely timed within her 24-hour day. Even her private thoughts adhered to a structured rhythm, each stray curiosity tucked away neatly like a file folder labeled unclassified. Yet amidst the rigid order of her world, there was a quiet space where questions lingered. Why had Corbett diverted to Lyra VII? What drove a man with his record to risk disobeying direct orders? Elara filed these questions away, labeling them pending, rather than acknowledging the spark of interest they ignited. On day 2 of her journey, she reviewed Corbett's psychological profile, a dense web of data compiled from interviews, performance evaluations, and sim scenarios. He was described as charismatic, impulsive, and fiercely independent, qualities that made him an asset on the frontier but a liability within Federation ranks. Her analytical mind dissected the profile methodically, comparing it against known patterns of deviant behavior among high-ranking officers. Yet something didn't fit. There were too many variables, too much gray area for her comfort. She set aside the profile with a mental note to revisit once she had more tangible data. The courier ship's hum changed subtly as it approached the fringe corridor, a transition from the ordered harmony of core space to the discordant melodies of the outer reaches. Stars shifted from brilliant white points to deeper hues of blue and indigo, a celestial palette reflecting the wild frontier ahead. Elara checked her sensors, cross-referencing the data with star charts updated mere weeks ago. The Lyra system flickered into view on long-range scans, a binary star system with a chaotic dance of planets and asteroids. Her heart rate increased fractionally, a physiological response she noted clinically before adjusting her breathing to restore equilibrium. Lyra VII itself was a murky blob on the edge of detectability, its surface obscured by swirling storms of ionized gas. Elara zoomed in, enhancing the image until the planet's chaotic beauty filled the display. Vast oceans churning beneath turbulent skies, landmasses fractured into jagged continents. She initiated standard hails to Commander Corbett and his scout ship Vigilant. Static crackled through her comms before a faint reply echoed back. "Vigilant, this is Dr. Elara Wynn of Federation Command. Please acknowledge." Silence stretched taut for several heartbeats before a gruff voice responded, "Wynn. Thought they'd send someone with more experience." Elara's lips tightened almost imperceptibly at the implied criticism. "Commander Corbett," she began, her tone measured and calm, "I am here to assess your situation and file a report. Please confirm your current status and coordinates." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Coordinates are classified for now. Status. We're in a bit of a pickle, but nothing I can't handle." Elara's fingers tightened around the comms panel. "Commander," she said, her voice steady despite the flare of irritation, "I am authorized to override your classification if necessary. Please provide an update." Another pause, longer this time. When Corbett spoke again, his tone had shifted, more serious. "All right, Wynn. We've got a situation down on Lyra VII, something big and alien. Colonists are reporting strange phenomena, and our local comms arrays are going haywire. I diverted to investigate." Elara absorbed this information, her mind already cataloging potential scenarios and countermeasures. An unknown alien presence disrupted communications. The implications were vast. "Have you made contact with the entity?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Not directly," Corbett replied, "but we've got visuals. It's not like anything we've seen before." Elara nodded to herself, filing away this new data point. "I will need access to your logs and sensor readings," she instructed, "and I expect full cooperation from your team." "You'll get it," Corbett said, a note of grudging respect in his voice. "But be prepared, Wynn. This place is wild." Elara acknowledged the warning with a silent nod, her gaze fixed on the swirling chaos of Lyra VII. The courier ship's engines hummed softly as she adjusted course, aligning herself with Vigilant's trajectory. As she approached the fringe sector, Elara felt a strange sensation. The clinical detachment that defined her world seemed to waver, replaced by a flicker of something more visceral. It was curiosity, pure and unadulterated, stirring beneath her meticulous exterior. She acknowledged it briefly, then pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. Her mission had shifted from mere reprimand to something far more complex, a dance with the unknown on the horizon's edge. And as she guided her ship deeper into the fringe sector, Dr. Elara Wynn prepared to step into the wild frontier, armed with nothing but her discipline and a burning need for answers. Chapter 3, Whispers in the Dust. The airlock of the Vigilant hiss-whispered open, releasing Commander Jay Corbett and his crew onto the surface of Lyra VII. The planet's gravity tugged gently at their boots as they stepped out onto the ancient landing field. The dome city loomed ahead, a colossal structure of glass and metal, its curved walls reflecting the cold light of a distant star. The silence was oppressive, a thick cloak that muffled even the sound of their breathing within their helmets. Jay led the way across the dusty expanse, his boots leaving fresh tracks in the undisturbed soil. The city dome was pristine from afar, but as they approached, the cracks and scars of age became apparent. The glass panes fogged with time, metal joints rusted. The entry portal stood ajar, a gaping mouth inviting them into the darkness beyond. Inside, the air was stale but breathable, recycled through ancient systems that hummed softly in the shadows. Kai Akafer's boots crunched on debris as he moved ahead, his light cutting through the gloom to reveal corridors and rooms frozen in time. Furniture stood untouched, layers of dust coating surfaces like a thick blanket. A table in one room still bore the remains of a meal, plates filled with petrified food, cups half full of what must have once been liquid. Zara Chen's voice crackled over the comms. Life support is still running on backup systems. Someone or something has kept these systems alive for 300 years. Jay nodded, though no one could see him through his visor. He moved cautiously, his gaze sweeping over the desolation. A sense of unease prickled at the back of his neck. This place was not just abandoned, it felt forsaken. Dr. Fen Walker paused by a mural on the wall, a vibrant scene of a thriving cityscape under twin suns. New Eden, he murmured, tracing the faded colors with gloved fingers. That's what they called this place. New Eden, Jay echoed softly. The words hung in the air like a ghostly echo. They ventured deeper into the dome, each footfall echoing through empty halls. The silence was not absolute. There were whispers, the faint hum of machinery, the creak of settling structures, the distant drip of water. It was as if the city held its breath, listening to their intrusion. Kai's voice broke the stillness. "Jay, over here." Following his call, Jay found Kai standing in a collapsed greenhouse. The glass walls had caved inward, leaving a tangle of metal and shattered panes. Within this rubble, something moved, a flash of color amidst the gray dust. A child. The creature was small, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with wide eyes that reflected the harsh beam of Kai's light. Dust caked their hair and clothes, blending them into the debris. The child stared at them without a flicker of emotion. No fear, no curiosity, just an unblinking gaze. Jay approached cautiously, lowering himself to one knee. He kept his hands visible but made no sudden movements. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I won't hurt you." The child didn't react, continuing to stare with those enormous eyes. Jay could see the dirt smudged on their cheeks, the thinness of their limbs under tattered clothes. This was no apparition. It was real, a survivor in this dead world. "What do we do?" Zara asked, her voice barely audible over the comms. Jay shook his head slightly. "We don't know what happened here, but this child is alive. That changes everything." He looked back at the child, offering a small smile. "Can you understand me? Do you know who I am?" The child blinked once, twice, then looked away briefly before returning its gaze to Jay. "Let's try something," Jay said, his voice gentle as he reached into his utility belt and pulled out a ration bar. He unwrapped it slowly, the crinkle of packaging loud in the silence. The scent of sweet nuts filled the air as he held it out towards the child. "Here, would you like this?" The child's gaze flicked to the food, then back to Jay. After a moment, one small hand reached out tentatively and took the bar. It didn't eat immediately, but held it close, fingers curling around the wrapper. Jay nodded encouragingly. "That's good." He stood up slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "We're going to take you back to our ship," he said. "It's safe there. You can rest." The child watched him with those unreadable eyes but didn't protest as Jay carefully scooped them up into his arms. The body was light, almost weightless against his chest. The child went rigid for a moment before relaxing slightly, head resting on Jay's shoulder. Back in the corridor, Zara and Kai exchanged glances over their helmets. Fen looked at the child with awe. "How?" he began but trailed off. "Later," Jay interrupted softly. "We need to get back to the Vigilant." The journey out of the dome was a silent procession through the empty halls. The city seemed to watch them go, its shadows stretching like arms reaching out in farewell. As they stepped back onto the landing field, the dome loomed behind them, dark and enigmatic. Jay carried the child carefully up the ramp into the Vigilant. Once inside, he set them down gently on a bench near the med bay. The child looked around warily but made no attempt to move away. Dr. Walker approached, his movements slow and non-threatening like Jay's had been. "I'm going to check you over," he said softly. "Make sure you're okay." The child watched him with those same unblinking eyes as Fen ran a scanner over their body. After a few moments, he nodded. "Healthy given the circumstances, malnourished but no immediate medical issues." Jay let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Good. Now what?" Zara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the worry in her eyes. "We need to find out who this child is and how they survived here alone. And why there's no one else," Kai added grimly. Jay looked down at the child still perched on the bench. Their small frame was relaxed now, eyes drooping slightly. He reached out cautiously and brushed a hand over their hair, feeling the grit of dust under his fingers. The child didn't flinch but leaned into the touch briefly before pulling away again. "For now," Jay said gently, "let's get you cleaned up." He carried the child to one of the crew quarters, setting them down on the bed. The room was small but comfortable, with a viewport showing the stark landscape outside. Jay pulled out fresh clothes from a locker and laid them on the bed. "You can rest here," he said softly. "No one will bother you." The child looked up at him, eyes reflecting the dim light of the room. Jay offered another small smile before stepping back and leaving them alone in the quiet cabin. Back in the corridor, Zara turned to Jay, her expression serious. "We need a plan. This changes everything." Jay nodded. "We explore more thoroughly tomorrow. Right now, let's give this child some space and rest." Kai leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "And if we find more survivors, then we help them," Jay said firmly. "That's why we're here, explorers first, soldiers second." Fen looked thoughtfully at the closed door to the crew quarters. "This child is a mystery in itself. How did they survive alone for so long? What do they know about what happened here?" Jay shook his head slowly. "One step at a time. For now, let's just make sure they're safe and comfortable." As the crew dispersed to their own quarters, Jay lingered outside the door, listening to the soft sounds from within. The rustle of fabric as the child moved, the faint whisper of breath. This place was more than just a dead world. It held secrets buried deep in its dusty corridors. And now, with this silent, watchful child in their midst, those secrets had taken on a new urgency. Jay stepped away finally, leaving the door slightly ajar. As he walked back to the bridge, he couldn't shake the feeling that New Eden was waking up from its long slumber, one whisper at a time. The vigilant hummed softly around him, a beacon of life in this silent expanse, carrying with it not just questions but also the fragile promise of answers. Chapter 4. Echoes of Protocol. The medical bay hummed with the soft whir of life support systems and the occasional beep of monitoring equipment. Commander Jay Corbett sat beside the small bed, his gaze fixed on the child who slept fitfully beneath a thin blanket. The boy's face was serene despite the turbulence that had brought him here, a silent enigma wrapped in tattered clothes and mystery. The door slid open with a hiss, and Dr. Elara Wynn entered, her boots clicking sharply against the metal deck. Her uniform was impeccable, every crease sharp as a knife's edge, but Jay noticed a small stain on her left sleeve, a smudge of something dark he couldn't quite identify. She paused at the doorway, taking in the sterile surroundings before her gaze landed on him and then shifted to the child. "Commander Corbett," she said, her voice cool and measured. She extended a datapad, displaying her credentials and mission orders with brisk efficiency. "Dr. Elara Wynn, Federation Special Investigator." Jay rose slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. He took the datapad and scanned it quickly before handing it back. "Doctor," he acknowledged, nodding toward the child. "This is why I haven't been at my most hospitable." Elara's gaze flicked to the sleeping form, then back to Jay. Her professional mask slipped ever so slightly as she studied the boy's delicate features. "I wasn't aware you had a passenger." Jay nodded and stepped aside, allowing her a clear view of the child. Elara approached cautiously, her clinical detachment faltering as the boy's hand twitched in his sleep, reaching for something unseen. "How did he come to be here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Found him on a derelict vessel," Jay replied softly. "He was drifting through space, no life signs aboard except his." Elara's eyes narrowed as she turned back to him. "Have you filed a discovery report?" "No." "Secured the site?" "No." "Complied with quarantine protocols?" Jay shook his head. "No, I haven't." Her expression darkened. "Commander, this is a grave breach of protocol." She tapped her datapad, pulling up a checklist of regulations and procedures. "You're aware of the dangers involved in unsecured contact with an unknown entity. The potential for biological contamination alone." "Elara," Jay interrupted gently, using her first name to soften the blow. "I didn't bring him here to follow protocols. I brought him because he needed help." She bristled at his familiarity but kept her tone steady. "And what if he carries something that threatens not just this ship but potentially every outpost in this sector?" Jay held her gaze, unflinching. "Then we deal with it, but not before we've done everything we can to save him." Elara's frustration boiled over. "You're putting emotion above procedure, Jay. This isn't some stray animal you found on a colony world." This is an unknown variable in a high-risk situation. Jay stepped closer, his voice low but intense. And what if he's the key to something bigger, something we don't understand yet? She scoffed. Or what if he's just another dead end in a galaxy full of them? You're playing with fire, Commander. He didn't back down. I'm playing with my instincts, Doctor, and right now they tell me this child is important. Elara sighed deeply, rubbing her temple as she paced away from the bed. She paused by the wall console, scrolling through the vigilance logs. Her eyes widened slightly as she noted the meticulous engine maintenance records and the detailed log of every system check. You keep a very clean ship, she said, her tone softening marginally. Jay smiled faintly. It's not just about procedure for me either. She turned back to him, her expression guarded but curious. Then what is it about? Responsibility, he replied without hesitation. To my crew, to this vessel, and now to that child. He gestured toward the sleeping boy. I can't just follow orders blindly when someone's life hangs in the balance. Elara hesitated before speaking again, her voice tinged with a rare hint of vulnerability. And what about the lives you might be risking by not following those orders? He stepped closer, his gaze steady. Then we mitigate that risk as best we can, but I won't sacrifice one life for the sake of hypotheticals. She looked away, her frustration palpable but controlled. She reached up to adjust a stray lock of hair, revealing more of the stain on her sleeve, dark and nearly unnoticeable against the deep blue of her uniform. Jay nodded toward it. You've got a spot there, he said gently. Elara glanced down, brushing at it absently before meeting his gaze again. A reminder of my own fallibility, I suppose. Fallibility is human, Jay replied softly, even in the Federation's finest. She studied him for a moment longer before her expression hardened once more. I need to run diagnostics on him, she said, her voice returning to its professional edge. And you need to start following protocol, Commander, for your sake and mine. Jay nodded slowly. You can run your tests, Doctor, but I won't stand by while you treat him like a specimen instead of a person. Elara's eyes flashed with annoyance but also a glimmer of respect. Fine, she conceded. But we do this my way, and if there's any sign of contamination or threat, you'll be the first to know, Jay finished for her. She nodded sharply, then turned back to the child. As she began setting up equipment and running preliminary scans, Jay watched her closely, his gaze a mix of curiosity and caution. Elara, he started hesitantly. She glanced up from her work, her expression guarded but attentive. Yes. How did you end up as an investigator for the Federation? He asked, his tone genuine. Her gaze softened briefly before she looked away again. I wanted to make a difference, she said simply, to ensure that no one else suffered the way my family did during the Outer Rim conflicts. Jay nodded understandingly. And you believe that protocol is the key to that? She met his eyes, her resolve unshaken. It's the foundation upon which we build our trust and security. Without it, we're just adrift in chaos. He smiled faintly. Well, maybe a bit of chaos isn't so bad every now and then. Elara couldn't help but return the smile, albeit briefly. She turned back to her work, her movements precise and methodical as she began running more detailed scans on the child. As Jay watched her, he felt a strange mix of admiration and frustration. She was rigid in her adherence to protocol, but there was an underlying passion for her work that resonated with him. He knew they were both right in their own ways, she in her commitment to order, and he in his conviction to act on instinct. The professional distance between them remained palpable, but beneath it simmered a growing curiosity, a mutual respect born from their starkly different perspectives. As Elara worked, Jay couldn't help but feel that this unlikely alliance might just be the key to unlocking more than one mystery aboard the Vigilant. He stepped back, giving her space as she continued her diagnostics. The medical bay hummed with a sense of quiet tension, two minds clashing and merging in ways neither had anticipated. And as the child slept peacefully between them, Jay knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, one step at a time. Chapter 5. Whispers from the depths, the domed city sprawled before them like a fossilized metropolis, frozen in time beneath the transparent barrier that cut it off from the planet's atmosphere. Commander Jay Corbett led the way, his boots crunching on the dusty expanse of what was once a bustling plaza. Dr. Elara Wynn followed closely behind, her datapad humming softly as she meticulously recorded every detail, her initial protests silenced by the stark reality of their surroundings. Zara Chen trailed slightly behind, her instruments held aloft like divining rods, picking up faint electromagnetic whispers from the city's depths. "It's old," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "Degraded, but definitely present." Dr. Fen Walker crouched near a crumbling wall, running a scanner over a strange residue that clung to the surface like a metallic slime. His brow furrowed in concentration as he peered at the readings. "This is extraordinary," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The composition is unlike anything I've encountered. Part organic, part synthetic. It's almost as if the material has evolved." Kai Akaffer stood apart from the group, his gaze fixed on an imposing structure that loomed at the plaza's edge. A sealed door, twice his height and 3 times as wide, bore a symbol etched into its surface, spiraling patterns that seemed to twist and shift under his scrutiny. "This doesn't match any known human culture," he said, stepping closer to inspect the carvings. "It's like nothing I've seen before." Elara joined him, her datapad whirring as she captured images of the symbol. "It reminds me of some ancient earth glyphs," she mused, "but those were static. It feels alive." Jay approached the door, his hand hovering over the alien symbol. He turned to Elara, a mix of caution and curiosity in his eyes. "Elara, I need you to document this next part carefully." Before she could respond, Zara's instruments let out an abrupt series of beeps. She froze, her eyes widening as she studied the readings. "We have activity," she announced, her voice tense. "Something is transmitting, a response signal coming from beneath us." The ground under their feet seemed to hum with energy, a low vibration that resonated through their boots. Fen looked up from his scan, alarm etched on his face. "That's not natural," he said. "Whatever this is, it's not geological." Kai stepped back from the door, his gaze darting between Zara and Jay. "We should be careful," he warned. "If something down there is responding to our presence." Jay nodded, but his expression was set with determination. "We need to see what's inside." He turned to Elara. "Ready?" Elara hesitated for a moment before nodding, her datapad held at the ready. The rest of the group formed a loose semicircle around them as Jay reached out and touched the symbol on the door. The air crackled with static, and the hum from below intensified. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the massive slab began to move. It slid inward with a grinding noise that sent shivers down their spines, revealing a gaping maw of darkness beyond. The light from their torches cut through the gloom, illuminating steps leading downward into the abyss. The air inside was stifling and heavy, laden with an acrid scent that made Elara's nose twitch. She activated her datapad's environmental sensors. "The atmosphere is breathable," she reported, "but there are trace amounts of something unfamiliar." Fen stepped forward, his scanner sweeping the area. "There's more of that residue down here," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "It's everywhere, the walls, the floor." Kai leaned in to examine a section of wall closer. The organic curves of the metal glistened under the torchlight, flowing into intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with an inner light. "This design, it's not just decorative," he observed. "Look at these lines, they form circuits or pathways." Elara moved her datapad closer to Kai's find, capturing high-resolution images and detailed scans of the patterns. "Fen, can you analyze this?" she asked. Fen nodded, running his own scanner over the surface. His brow furrowed as he studied the readings. "It's not just a pattern," he began, his voice tinged with awe. "These lines, they conduct energy. Not electricity as we understand it, but something more fluid, almost biological." Jay listened intently, his hand resting on the hilt of his sidearm. He turned to Zara. "Anything from your instruments?" Zara shook her head slightly before answering. "The signal is stronger down here, but it's erratic, like pulses or heartbeats." Elara shivered involuntarily. "We should be cautious." Jay nodded and took a deep breath. "All right, let's move out." He led the way down the steps, their footsteps echoing ominously in the vast chamber. The descent felt interminable, each step taking them deeper into the unknown. The air grew colder, and the scent of metal mixed with an underlying sweetness that was almost floral. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, metallic smell of the dome city above. At last, they reached a landing at the bottom of the stairs. A vast chamber stretched out before them, illuminated dimly by glowing panels embedded in the walls and ceiling. The space was immense, filled with colossal structures that resembled trees or coral formations. Organic shapes carved from metal and stone, twisting and reaching toward an unseen sky. Elara gasped softly, her datapad whirring as she captured the surreal tableau. This place, it's breathtaking. Fenn moved closer to one of the towering structures, his scanner whirring. The composition is consistent with what we found above, he murmured. But the complexity, this isn't just technology, it's architecture. Kai approached a different formation, his hand tracing the smooth curves. This reminds me of something, he mused almost to himself. Something ancient and forgotten. Jay watched Kai closely, noting the faraway look in his eyes. What is it? Kai shook his head slightly. Just a feeling. Like I've seen this before, in dreams or stories. Elara glanced at Jay, her expression a mix of excitement and trepidation. They were standing on the precipice of something monumental, but she knew better than to rush ahead without careful consideration. Zara, meanwhile, was deeply engrossed with her instruments. The signal is still pulsing, she reported. It's coming from there. She pointed toward a narrow passage leading deeper into the chamber. Jay followed Zara's direction and nodded. Let's go. The group moved cautiously through the labyrinthine paths between the towering structures. The air grew thicker, almost viscous, and the hum beneath their feet intensified. Elara's environmental sensors flashed warnings about increased particulate matter in the air, fragments of metal and organic compounds mingling in a swirling mist. Finally, they reached the source of the transmission, another sealed door, much smaller than the one above but equally ominous. The symbol carved into its surface was more intricate, the spiraling patterns denser and more complex. Fenn moved to examine it closely. This is different from the one upstairs, he said, his voice barely audible over the hum. The energy signature is stronger, almost alive. Jay stepped forward, his hand hovering over the symbol. He glanced back at Elara, who nodded grimly. She was ready. As Jay touched the symbol, the ground trembled beneath them. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing another set of stairs descending into yet deeper darkness. A gust of cold air swept up from below, carrying with it an almost imperceptible melody, a haunting, ethereal tune that seemed to resonate within their very souls. Elara's eyes widened in shock and awe. "What is that?" she whispered. Fenn shook his head, his voice barely audible over the song. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's calling us." Kai took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the descending steps. "We should go down," he said quietly. "There's something down there waiting for us." Jay hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He turned to Elara. "Document everything," he ordered. Elara swallowed hard and nodded back, her datapad held tightly in her grasp. The group moved as one, descending into the unknown depths where the haunting melody awaited them, a symphony of the unspoken secrets hidden within the heart of the planet. The door behind them slid shut with a finality that echoed through their minds. There was no turning back now. They had crossed the threshold and entered the realm of shadows and whispers, where ancient technologies still pulsed with life, and civilization's long-vanished left traces etched into the very fabric of reality. The unknown stretched out before them, a void of possibilities both wondrous and terrifying. As Jay and Elara stood side by side at the edge of this new abyss, neither spoke. Their breaths mingled in the cold air, a silent pact binding them to the journey ahead, one from which there could be no return. The door had opened, revealing a path into darkness, and the unknown awaited below with an eerie, inviting melody that seemed to promise answers to questions they hadn't yet dared to ask. Chapter 6. Assembling the edge, the landing pad of Frontier Outpost Ecominus 7 buzzed with an energy that was as much chaos as it was coordination. Commander Jay Corbett stood at the center of it all, a calm eye in the storm, barking orders and greetings with equal ease. Dr. Elara Wynn observed from the sidelines, her Federation-issued datapad humming softly as she recorded the scene. A rugged, weather-beaten figure emerged from the crowd, hauling a bulky equipment case behind him. His hair was more salt than pepper, and his eyes held a distant gaze that spoke of years spent under alien skies. "Jay Corbett," he grunted, extending a calloused hand to Jay. "It's been too long." "Morse," Jay replied, grasping the hand firmly. "You're looking as grumpy as ever." He turned to Elara, who was trying and failing to hide her curiosity. "Elara Wynn, this is Morse. Best comms specialist I've ever known." Morse gave Elara a cursory nod before turning back to Jay. "Still humming the old Nav songs," he said gruffly, tapping his temple. "They keep the static at bay." Elara raised an eyebrow but said nothing as Morse began unpacking an array of antiquated communication devices. Next arrived Dr. Fenn Walker's former colleague, a woman with wide eyes and even wider glasses. She clutched a small case to her chest like a lifeline. "Jay," she asked tentatively, looking around the bustling outpost. I'm Dr. Lyra VII." Jay smiled reassuringly. "Lyra, right on time," he gestured to Elara. "This is Dr. Wynn. She's our expert in all things ancient and mysterious." Lyra nodded nervously at Elara before turning back to Jay. "I've never been off-world like this," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the din. "I mean, I study alien life, but not like this. It's terrifying and exciting." Jay chuckled. "You'll do fine, Lyra. We need your expertise down there." The final member of their impromptu crew was a tall, lanky figure with a mop of curly hair and a grin that seemed permanently affixed to his face. He approached Jay with a casual swagger, carrying a tool belt bristling with an array of gadgets. "Commander Corbett," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Grit, your structural specialist." Jay shook his hand firmly. "Grit, good to have you on board." He glanced at Elara's datapad. "You're documenting all this?" Elara looked up from her notes. "Just standard procedure. This is quite different from what I'm used to." Jay nodded, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Different strokes for different folks, Doc. Now let's get everyone suited up and briefed." He turned back to the group, raising his voice to be heard over the noise. "All right, listen up. We've got a sealed chamber down there that's been untouched for God knows how long. Our job is to get in, find out what's inside, and get back out without causing any interstellar incidents." Morse grunted, already tinkering with one of his devices. "What kind of encryption are we talking about?" Jay glanced at Elara, who consulted her datapad. "Ancient," she said simply. "Possibly pre-Federation. It's unlike anything I've seen before." Morse snorted. "Sounds like a challenge. I'll have it cracked in no time." Lyra shivered slightly despite the warm air. "And what if there's something down there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jay gave her an encouraging smile. "That's why we've got you, Lyra, to tell us if whatever is down there wants to eat us or not." Grit chuckled, adjusting his tool belt. "And if it does, I'll build a wall." He laughed at his own joke before sobering slightly. "Seriously, though, this place is a marvel. 20 years keeping domes from collapsing. Never seen anything like what's down there." Elara watched as Jay moved among the group, offering words of encouragement or clarification with an ease that belied his rank. There was no barking of orders, no demand for immediate compliance. Instead, he fostered a sense of camaraderie, of shared purpose. Zara Chen approached, carrying the child by the hand. The girl's eyes were wide as she took in the bustling outpost, her free hand clutching a small datapad filled with intricate drawings. Elara noticed Zara leaning down to murmur something to the child, who nodded solemnly before holding up one of her sketches. Jay caught sight of them and waved them over. "Zara, you remember Morse and Grit," he gestured to Lyra. "This is Dr. Vesperia." Zara smiled at each in turn. "Good to see you all again." She turned to Jay. "The kid's been drawing non-stop. Recognize these patterns?" Jay took the datapad from the child and studied the swirling symbols. They echoed the markings on the sealed door, but there was something more, a sense of narrative, a story told in lines and curves. Elara leaned in to get a better look. "Are those coordinates?" she asked, squinting at one particularly dense cluster of marks. Zara shook her head. "Not sure, but they match the door. She's been drawing them for days." The child looked up at Elara with serious eyes, then pointed at the datapad before mimicking a descending motion with her hand. Jay nodded thoughtfully. "She wants us to take it with us?" Zara shrugged. "Seems that way." Jay handed the datapad back to the child, who clutched it tightly to her chest. He turned back to the group, his expression resolute. "All right, everyone's suited up. Let's gear up and get moving." The crew dispersed to a nearby equipment shed, returning moments later in a variety of mismatched but functional exosuits. Morse hummed an old navigation tune under his breath as he adjusted his helmet, while Lyra fidgeted nervously with her gloves. Grit, ever the joker, did a mock tumble in zero-gravity simulation mode, laughing as he floated briefly before correcting himself. Elara watched them with a mixture of professional discomfort and grudging admiration. These weren't Federation soldiers. They were frontier scavengers, rough around the edges but skilled beyond measure. She could see it now, their easy familiarity with each other, the way Jay guided rather than commanded. Jay approached her as she stood on the periphery, her datapad humming softly in her hand. "You ready for this, Doc?" he asked, a hint of challenge in his voice. Elara met his gaze steadily. "I'm here to document and analyze," she replied. "But I have to admit there's more going on here than just procedure." Jay smiled slightly. "Good, because out here sometimes the rules change faster than you can write them down." He gestured towards the sealed chamber entrance, visible through a large viewport. "You ready to see what's down there?" Elara took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's do this." The crew assembled at the entry point, a vast opening in the bedrock that yawned like a mouth into darkness. Jay led the way, his suit lights cutting through the gloom. One by one they followed, Morse with his array of comms gear, Lyra clutching her biological scanner, Grit with tools slung over his shoulder, Zara guiding the child, and Elara bringing up the rear. As they descended into the depths, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far larger than any of them could comprehend. The walls bore ancient carvings, echoing the patterns in the child's drawings. She looked back at the girl, who met her gaze steadily before returning to her sketchpad, adding more lines to the intricate map. The sealed chamber waited below them, a dark promise of secrets yet untold. Elara took one last look around at the motley crew she found herself with, the grizzled veteran humming his old songs, the terrified but excited xenobiologist, the jocular engineer, and the silent child drawing her enigmatic patterns. And then they stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever horrors or wonders lay hidden in the depths of Horizon's Edge. Chapter 7. Shadows in the archives, the hum of the Vigilance engines was a steady drone behind Dr. Elara Wynn, as she pored over the holographic displays scattered across her makeshift office. The temporary quarters were sparsely furnished, but the wall-mounted screens and data pads gave her more than enough workspace to immerse herself in the historical records of the Federation. Her fingers traced through layers of digital archives, each one revealing a piece of the puzzle that had begun to haunt her. The charter for Lyra VII settlement was dated October 12, 2143. The original document, faded but clear, listed the founding members and outlined the terms of their partnership with the fledgling Federation. Amongst the familiar names of early colonists and Federation officials, one stood out like a shadow: the Karru Collective. Elara zoomed in on the reference, her eyes scanning lines of text that seemed both archaic and eerily contemporary. The Karru Collective agrees to provide essential resources in exchange for technological advancements from Federation research divisions. Both parties acknowledge the mutual benefit derived from this alliance. She cross-referenced with other archives, diplomatic records, trade agreements, even personal communications between early settlers and Federation diplomats. The Karru Collective was woven through these documents like an unseen thread, always present but rarely mentioned outright. The pattern of their interaction was meticulously documented for nearly 4 decades. Then in 2183 it stopped. No termination notice, no formal withdrawal, just silence, as if the Karru Collective had vanished into thin air. Elara's curiosity deepened into a gnawing unease as she delved further. She pulled up border defense records, starting with the same year, 2183, and compared them to subsequent years. The first discrepancy was subtle: a request for additional garrison troops in Sector 45B denied due to budgetary constraints. 3 months later, another request for defensive infrastructure upgrades in Sector 79A deferred until further notice. By 2190, the denials and deferrals were more frequent. She traced them across decades. Requests for reinforcement in the rim sectors consistently met with polite refusals, always documented, always reasonable on paper. Yet, when laid out chronologically, they formed a chilling mosaic of strategic weakening along the Federation's outer edges. Elara leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. The patterns were undeniable, but what did it mean? She thought of Jay Corbett, the Vigilance commander. Their relationship had started on shaky ground, she an inspector, he a soldier. But over time, mutual respect had grown. She gathered the evidence into a single data packet and made her way to his office. The door slid open at her approach, revealing Jay seated behind his desk, reviewing tactical reports. He looked up as she entered, his expression neutral but attentive. "Commander," Elara began, stepping forward, "I need to show you something." Jay nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat across from him. She placed the data pad on the desk between them and activated the holographic display. The room filled with layers of text and charts, charters, defense records, budget documents. Elara walked him through her findings. The Karru Collective's mysterious presence, their abrupt disappearance, the pattern of denied requests for rim defenses. Jay listened intently, his gaze flicking between Elara and the holograms. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Thank you," he said softly. Elara blinked, taken aback. "Thank you, that's all you have to say?" Jay offered a small smile. "I appreciate your thoroughness, Elara. You didn't come here looking for this. You were looking for something else entirely." She nodded, feeling a strange mix of validation and vulnerability. "I came here expecting a rogue officer, not. Whatever this is. You found something much bigger," Jay agreed, "and it's dangerous to know that kind of truth on its own, but we need to keep digging." Elara felt a surge of resolve. "What do you suggest?" Jay stood up and walked around the desk, leaning against it beside her. "We need more data. Start with personal logs, anything outside official channels. People talk differently in private." Elara nodded, already formulating her next steps. Before leaving his office, she turned back to Jay. "You're not going to tell anyone about this, are you?" His gaze met hers, steady and serious. "Not until we know more. This could implicate high-ranking officials. We need solid evidence before we make any moves." As Elara returned to her quarters, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She spent hours poring over personal logs from various commanders stationed in rim sectors during the critical years. The tone shifted noticeably around 2183, a sense of tension, whispers of higher orders, cryptic references to unspoken directives. One log entry stood out, a private communication between Commander Alia Vesperia and her second-in-command. "We're cutting back on patrols again. This isn't about budget cuts, something bigger is at play. The brass keeps telling us it's for the greater good, but I can't shake this feeling we're being played." Elara saved the excerpt, her heart pounding. She was treading into dangerous territory, but the allure of uncovering the truth kept her going. As the night wore on, Elara found herself in the mess hall, the hum of activity reduced to a quiet murmur. Jay joined her, carrying 2 steaming cups of synth coffee. They sat side by side at an empty table, the holographic display from earlier still active between them. "You should rest," he said softly, sliding a cup towards her. "But I know you won't." Elara took the coffee, feeling its warmth seep into her fingers. "I can't stop thinking about it. Who are they? The Karru Collective, I mean, if they were real, why erase them?" Jay sipped his drink, his gaze fixed on the display. "And what happened to them? Did they withdraw, or was something more sinister at play?" Elara nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their discovery hanging heavy between them. "I didn't file a report today," Elara admitted suddenly, looking down at her coffee. Jay glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You're not on official duty anymore, Elara. You found something bigger than either of us expected." She looked up at him, gratitude welling in her chest. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said quietly. A faint smile touched Jay's lips. "And I couldn't do it without you. We make a good team." Elara felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the coffee. It was a strange, comforting sensation, a bond forged in shared discovery and mutual trust. As they continued to sift through the data, Elara realized something else. She hadn't filed a report in 3 days. The thought should have filled her with anxiety, but instead it felt liberating. She wasn't just an inspector anymore. She was part of something larger, a quest for truth that transcended protocols and orders. The mess hall grew quieter as the night deepened, leaving them alone with their thoughts and the ghostly glow of the holograms. Elara leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting over the patterns of denial and silence etched across decades of Federation history. "What if this is just the tip of the iceberg?" she murmured. "What else are they hiding?" Jay looked at her, his eyes reflecting the soft light. "We'll find out together." In that quiet moment, Elara knew she had crossed a threshold, from skepticism to belief, from isolation to partnership. Whatever lay ahead, she wouldn't face it alone. The Vigilant hummed around them, a steady heartbeat in the vastness of space. And within its confines, two unlikely allies sat amidst evidence of a conspiracy that threatened to unravel everything they knew about their world. But for now, they were content to sit in silence, holding the fragments of truth like pieces of a shattered mirror, waiting for the moment when they could begin to see the whole picture. Chapter 8, Encounters at Horizon's Edge. The Vigilant shuddered under Jay Corbett's steady grip on the command console. The bridge was a symphony of alarm bells and flashing lights, but his voice cut through the chaos with the calm precision of a seasoned commander. "Kai status report," Jay barked into his comms unit. From the depths of the engine room, Kai Ockhaffer's voice crackled back. "Communications are down by 60%. Navigation's holding at 40. I'm rerouting power, but these things are persistent." Jay nodded, even though no one could see him through the static-filled comms. "Elara, any luck with those shields?" Dr. Elara Wynn's voice was tinged with strain but steady. "Shields are at maximum, Commander, but they're not designed to deflect this kind of interference. We're holding, but it's a fight." "Zara, anything on that peaceful signal?" Jay asked, his eyes scanning the tactical display. Zara Chen leaned over her console, fingers dancing across holographic keyboards. "Transmitting now," she replied, her voice tight with concentration. "I've modulated the frequency to match their interference patterns, hoping they'll recognize it as a response rather than another attack." Jay turned back to the main viewport, where three metallic organisms floated ominously in Lyra VII's vast sky. The Karru probes were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, a blend of organic and synthetic that defied easy categorization. They pulsed with an otherworldly light, tendrils of what looked like living metal stretching out like antennae, probing the Vigilant's hull. "Fen, any insights?" Jay asked Dr. Fen Walker, who was bent over a data pad, eyes scanning rows of alien biosignatures. Fen looked up, his brow furrowed in thought. "They're not attacking with force, they're trying to incapacitate us. This is more about disruption than destruction." Jay nodded grimly. "Understood. Kai, can you isolate their interference pattern and use it against them?" "Working on it," Kai replied, his voice strained but determined. The bridge hummed with tense activity as Zara's fingers continued to weave through the digital landscape of alien frequencies. The probes seemed to react subtly to her transmissions, their movements shifting ever so slightly, a ripple in their otherwise relentless assault. Jay watched the creatures closely, trying to discern patterns in their behavior. They moved with a fluid grace, almost sentient. It was eerie how they seemed to adapt to the Vigilant's attempts at evasion and defense, adjusting their interference as if learning from each interaction. "Zara, are you getting any response?" Jay asked after several tense minutes. "No direct communication," Zara replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "But I think they're listening. The patterns in their interference are changing slightly when I send new signals." Jay leaned forward, his gaze locked on the probes. "Keep at it. We need to establish some form of dialogue." The Vigilant shuddered again as Kai's efforts yielded a brief respite from the assault. Jay felt a flicker of hope but knew better than to let it consume him. "Kai, report!" he barked into his comms unit once more. "There!" Kai's voice burst through, triumphant. "I've isolated their pattern and rerouted our power systems to disrupt theirs. They're getting confused." The probes flickered in the viewport, their movements becoming jerky and disjointed. It was as if they were trying to process something unexpected. Zara looked up from her console, a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. "Commander, I think we have contact." Jay's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" "Their interference patterns are stabilizing," Zara explained rapidly, "and now they're transmitting something new." "What kind of transmission?" Jay asked. Zara shook her head slowly, a hint of awe in her expression. It's complex, not just data bursts or noise, it's structured almost like language. Jay turned to Fen. Fen, what do you make of it? Fen studied the data pad intently before looking up. It's not random. There's a pattern, a rhythm. Zara might be right, it could be communication. Can we decipher it? Jay asked. Elara chimed in from her station. With enough time and processing power, I think so. But for now, we need to keep them engaged without provoking another attack. Zara's fingers danced over the console again, her eyes locked on the alien transmission. I'm trying to mirror their rhythm, she muttered. If they can understand patterns, maybe this will get through. The Vigilant continued its dance in space, evading the probe's interference while Kai's systems worked tirelessly against them. Jay watched the viewport, his mind racing with possibilities and questions. What were these creatures? Why had they come to Lyra VII? Were they hostile or merely curious? And how could humanity hope to communicate with something so alien? Zara's voice cut through his thoughts. Commander, I'm detecting a change in their behavior. Jay's gaze snapped back to the viewport. The probes were retreating, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. Their tendrils retracted, and they drifted away from the Vigilant like living stars fading into the night. Status report, Jay demanded sharply. Kai's voice came through clearer now, the static diminishing as systems stabilized. Interference is dropping. They're disengaging. Elara added, shields are holding at 80%. No immediate threat detected. Jay let out a slow breath, his grip on the console easing slightly. The probes continued their withdrawal until they were mere specks against the cosmic backdrop. Zara, what's happening? Jay asked softly. Zara's voice was filled with wonder. They're transmitting something different now. It's calmer, less aggressive. Jay nodded slowly. Keep monitoring that signal. We need to understand what we just experienced. The bridge settled into a tense calm as the crew waited, their eyes on the viewport and consoles. The probes were gone, but their presence lingered like a specter, unseen yet felt. Zara looked up from her station after several long minutes of intense study. Commander, the new transmission ... it's a sequence. Repeated. Like a code. Jay moved to stand beside her. Can we decode it? It'll take time, Zara replied, her fingers still moving over the holographic keys. But I think we can. And I think they want us to. Fen approached from his station, data pad in hand. The biology of these creatures is fascinating. They're not just machines, they have organic components that respond to stimuli. It's as if they're learning through interaction. Elara chimed in, her voice thoughtful. That means we might be dealing with an intelligence capable of adaptation and possibly empathy. Jay nodded slowly, his mind racing with the implications. We need to prepare for further encounters. Kai, how are our systems holding? Kai's reply was confident. Systems are stabilizing. We'll need repairs, but we're operational. Good, Jay said firmly. Elara Fen, I want a full report on these creatures by tomorrow. Zara, continue your work on the transmission. We need to understand what they're trying to tell us. The bridge crew nodded in unison, their expressions a mix of relief and determination. They had faced an alien force and survived. Now the real challenge began, understanding and communicating with something utterly foreign yet undeniably intelligent. Jay turned back to the viewport, his gaze fixed on the empty sky where the probes had vanished. We've made first contact, he murmured softly. Now we need to learn their language. And so, under the watchful eye of Lyra VII's distant stars, the Vigilant began its new mission, to bridge the gap between human and Karru to forge a connection across the cosmic divide. The crew worked tirelessly through the night, each focused on their tasks with a renewed sense of purpose. The Vigilant drifted in silence, its systems humming softly as if listening for any sign of the alien presence that had so abruptly entered and exited their world. Zara's fingers moved ceaselessly over her console, the glow of holographic keys casting shadows on her face. She was deep into the transmission, deciphering patterns and sequences with a meticulousness born of desperation and curiosity. Hours later, as the first hints of dawn broke over Lyra VII's horizon, Zara finally looked up from her work. Her eyes were weary but sparkling with discovery. Commander, she called softly, drawing Jay to her side. He leaned over her console, his gaze scanning the rows of data. What have you found? Zara pointed to a sequence on the screen. a series of pulses and intervals that seemed to form a rhythmic pattern. "This is the heart of their message," she explained. "It repeats at regular intervals but varies slightly each time." Jay studied the sequence, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What does it mean?" Zara hesitated before speaking. "I think ... it's an invitation." Jay looked at her sharply. "An invitation to what?" She shook her head slowly. "I'm not sure yet, but it feels ... intentional. As if they're asking us to follow." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Jay straightened, his mind racing with possibilities. "Keep working on it," he instructed gently. "We need to understand their intent before we make any decisions." Zara nodded, her eyes already returning to the screen. Jay stepped back, his gaze once more drawn to the viewport and the vast expanse of space beyond. The Vigilant was at a crossroads, between caution and curiosity, between fear and wonder. And Jay knew that whatever lay ahead, he trusted his crew implicitly. Together, they would navigate the uncharted waters of first contact and forge a new path into the unknown. Chapter 9. Atmospheric Gambit. The Vigilant shuddered as it pierced the upper atmosphere of the ancient planet, the domed city looming ahead like a colossal, iridescent bubble. Commander Jay Corbett gripped the controls with white knuckles, his eyes scanning the holographic displays that flickered with warnings and alarms. The ship groaned under the strain of atmospheric entry, but Jay pushed it harder, using the dome's magnetic fields as cover. "Jay, we're taking heavy turbulence." Kai Ockhaffer's voice crackled over the comms from the engineering bay. "The stabilizers can't handle much more." "I know, Kai," Jay replied, teeth clenched. "Just hold on." Behind him, Dr. Elara Wynn stood in the command center, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. She watched as the probes, larger and more aggressive than any they'd encountered before, swarmed around them like metallic locusts. One probe, however, seemed to hesitate near the dome's edge. "Elara," Jay barked without turning, "what are those things doing?" Elara leaned over a console, her fingers dancing over the interface. "They're not attacking. They're scanning." Zara Chen, seated at the communications station, frantically input commands into her terminal. "I'm trying to establish a channel, but their frequency is erratic. I can't lock on." "Keep trying," Jay ordered. A sudden jolt rocked the ship. An alarm blared from the engineering bay. "We've got a problem," Kai shouted. "One probe has locked onto us and it's drilling into the port side. Section 7, it's where I am." Jay's heart pounded. He banked the Vigilant sharply, trying to dislodge the probe, but its grip was tenacious. The ship shuddered again, and Kai's voice came over the comms, strained but steady. "It's not destroying. It's drilling in a pattern." Elara's eyes widened as she studied the scanned data on her terminal. "Jay, I think it's trying to interface with us. It found something in our systems." "Kai, get out of there," Jay commanded. "I can't, it's too late," Kai replied. "I'm trying to reroute power, but it's inside now." Elara rushed to the engineering bay, grabbing a portable terminal on her way. She plugged into the ship's mainframe and began broadcasting raw data. It was unfiltered, amplified by brute force. "What are you doing?" Zara asked, turning from her station. "I'm sending them the same frequency we used before," Elara said. "I just hope they understand it." The probe's drilling stopped. The Vigilant trembled as it withdrew its drill. Kai let out a shaky breath over the comms. It's stopping." Jay eased off the controls, allowing the ship to stabilize. The other probes continued their hesitant dance around them. "Status report," Jay demanded. "Kai is injured minor but shaken," Elara reported from the engineering bay. "I can walk," Kai's voice came back over the comms. "Just need a moment." Jay nodded, then turned to Zara. "Keep trying that channel." "On it," she replied with renewed focus. In the med bay, Elara knelt by Kai's side, her hands steady as she applied a dermal regeneration patch to his arm. His skin was flushed from adrenaline and pain, but his eyes sparkled with relief. She smiled at him, her touch gentle yet firm. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of medical equipment. "You did well," Elara murmured. Kai grinned weakly. "Thanks, though I think rusting out in space would have been less dramatic." Elara chuckled softly and helped him sit up. "You're tougher than you look, Kai." Jay appeared in the doorway, his presence unannounced but not unwelcome. He held 2 steaming cups of tea, the aroma filling the small room. "How are we holding up?" he asked, his voice gruff but laced with concern. "Better now," Kai replied, taking one of the cups from Jay. "Thanks." Elara looked up, her hair loose around her shoulders, tendrils escaping from the pins that usually held it in a neat bun. Her eyes met Jay's for a moment before she turned back to Kai. "Just need to keep an eye on him," she said. Jay nodded and handed Elara the other cup. Thought you could use it." She took the cup, her fingers brushing against his briefly. She felt a small jolt at the contact, but quickly composed herself. "Thank you." The three of them sipped their tea in silence for a moment, the tension easing from their shoulders. "You okay?" Jay asked Elara quietly as Kai leaned back on the med bed. Elara nodded. "We managed to communicate with one probe and get it to withdraw, but we need to analyze what it found." Jay's eyes narrowed slightly as he considered this. "I'll have Zara work on decoding anything they might have sent back." "And Fen?" Elara asked, glancing at the door. "Fen is trying to make sense of their behavior," Jay replied. "He's been frantic but useful." "Useful indeed," Kai interjected with a smirk. "Like a rusty gear in a well-oiled machine, always grinding something." Elara and Jay exchanged a small smile, the tension breaking into a shared moment of relief. Jay set his cup down on a nearby console and walked over to where Karru probe lay motionless on a diagnostic table. The probe's metallic body was cool to the touch, but hummed with an almost imperceptible energy. Elara looked up from Kai as she sensed Jay's movement closer to her side. "You did something out there that could have cost us everything, Jay." "It worked," he said simply. "I couldn't risk losing the ship or any more of you." "I know," Elara replied softly. She paused and then added, "But we need to be careful. This isn't just about survival anymore, it's about understanding them." Jay nodded, his gaze fixed on Karru probe. "We'll figure it out." Back in the command center, Zara had her headset clamped over her ears. She was engrossed in deciphering a stream of data that flickered across multiple screens. "Zara," Jay approached her station, Elara following close behind. "I think I've got something," Zara said, not looking up from her work. "It's complicated, but there are patterns here." Elara leaned over the console to study the data. "Can you isolate the frequency they used?" "Working on it," Zara replied, fingers dancing over the keys. Jay turned to Elara. "You did something incredible back there." Her gaze met his for a moment before she looked away. "I just did what had to be done." "Elara," Jay began again, more serious. "You showed courage, something we're going to need a lot of if we're going to survive this." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and determination. "We'll get through it." As they stood there together in the quiet hum of the command center, something unspoken passed between them. A shared understanding that went beyond their roles on the Vigilant. It was a connection forged in the heat of battle, tempered by the realization that each of them had chosen to step outside protocol for the sake of survival and discovery. In the med bay, Kai finally dozed off, his breathing steady. Elara tucked a blanket around him before turning back to Jay at the doorway. She handed him her empty cup. "You should get some rest too," he suggested gently. Elara nodded but hesitated. "Will you stay here with him for a bit?" Jay looked at Kai and then back at Elara. "Of course." She left, her steps light as she headed towards her quarters. Jay watched her go before taking the chair beside Kai's bed. As he sipped his tea, he felt a strange sense of calm settling over them. They had faced danger head-on and emerged stronger, more united. The Vigilant continued its steady journey through the atmosphere, the dome city glowing softly in the distance like an ancient beacon guiding them forward. The crew settled into a rhythm of cautious hope and resilience, each knowing that their bonds were deeper now, forged by fire and tempered by the unknown. As Jay sat there, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far greater than they could imagine. But for now, the quiet moments in the med bay offered a respite from the storm, a chance to recharge and prepare for whatever lay ahead. And for the first time since the probes had begun their relentless pursuit, Jay felt a glimmer of hope. They were not alone, they had each other, and sometimes that was enough. Chapter 10. The Whispering Abyss. The modified shuttle descended into the volcanic vent like a metal insect burrowing into the Earth's flesh. Commander Jay Corbett gripped the controls with a firmness that belied the tumult within him. Beside him, Dr. Fen Walker fiddled with an array of instruments, his eyes wide behind his glasses as the devices spat out incomprehensible readings. "Jay, the electromagnetic interference is off the charts," Fenn muttered, adjusting knobs and tapping screens futilely. "I can't get a stable reading on anything." Corbett glanced at the scientist, then back to the dark tunnel stretching endlessly before them. "We'll have to go in blind, then." His voice echoed in the cramped cabin. Behind them, Kai Akafer and Zara Chen huddled together, their faces illuminated by the dim glow of failing screens. Zara's eyes reflected the dance of shadows outside, her expression a mix of awe and apprehension. The child sat quietly between them, her small form still as a statue, but her gaze fixed intently on the void ahead. Elara Wynn, strapped into the co-pilot's seat, turned to Jay, her voice low but urgent. "Commander, we should reconsider. We have no idea what's down there. Every protocol." "Elara," Jay cut her off gently, "I hear you, but we've come this far. Let's see what's waiting for us." She sighed, frustration evident in the set of her jaw, but she nodded. The shuttle shuddered as it navigated the narrow tunnel, the air thick with dust and ancient echoes. Suddenly, the darkness ahead receded, revealing an expanse that stole their breath away. The cavern opened up like a chasm, vast and silent, its walls glistening with crystalline formations that caught the dim light of their shuttle. And there it was, the Karru mother's ship. It lay embedded in the heart of the cavern, half buried in stone yet unmistakably alive. The hull shimmered with an iridescent sheen, organic and metallic at once, like a colossal creature slumbering beneath the earth. Fenn gasped, his instruments forgotten. It's breathtaking," he whispered, leaning forward as if trying to drink in every detail. His fingers trembled slightly as he pointed at the ship. The biomorphic structure, the integration of mineral and organic compounds, it defies everything we know about extraterrestrial engineering. Zara's breath hitched beside him. She leaned over the seat back, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's like something out of the old frontier tales," she murmured. "But so much bigger, so real." Kai nodded, his voice barely audible. "It's humbling, makes you feel small, doesn't it?" The child stirred, her tiny hand reaching out to touch the cool glass of the shuttle's window. She made a sound, a soft, resonant hum that filled the cabin, vibrating through their bones and echoing off the cavern walls. It was a melody unlike anything they had heard before, haunting and familiar all at once. Corbett felt a shiver run down his spine. He looked back at the child, her eyes reflecting the luminescence of the ship. She recognized this place, he could feel it in his gut. Elara's voice cut through the silence, sharp with concern. "Commander, Jay," Fenn interrupted, turning to him with an intensity that bordered on desperation. "This is unprecedented. We're looking at technology or biology that predates human arrival by centuries. The implications, we'll explore it," Jay said firmly, cutting off the scientist's eager rambling. He glanced back at Elara, his expression softer. "But we do it carefully." Elara nodded, though her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. She knew better than to argue further. Corbett had made up his mind. The shuttle hovered cautiously above the ship, its engines whirring softly as Jay maneuvered it closer to the hull. The surface was rough and uneven, like the bark of some ancient tree, yet pulsed with a subtle energy that made the air hum. "We're going in," Jay announced, his voice steady despite the turmoil within him. Fenn nodded eagerly, already reaching for his gear. "I'll need to take samples, document everything." Zara unbuckled her harness, her movements quick and sure. "I'll help you, Dr. Walker. We can't miss a single detail." Kai followed suit, turning to the child. "Stay close," he murmured softly, taking her small hand in his. Elara sighed, but she too began preparations, checking her gear with meticulous care. She glanced at Jay one last time, her gaze lingering on him. "Be careful," she said quietly. He nodded, meeting her eyes. "Always." The shuttle settled onto the hull with a gentle thud, its landing gear sinking slightly into the organic surface. A shiver ran through the ship beneath them, as if it stirred in response to their touch. Then, slowly, deliberately, lights began to bloom around them. They weren't harsh or blinding. Instead, they were soft and ethereal, casting a warm glow that bathed the cavern in an otherworldly radiance. The lights pulsed gently, tracing paths along the hull like veins of luminescent sap, guiding them towards a point where the ship seemed to yield beneath their feet. The child tugged at Kai's hand, leading him toward the pulsating light. He followed her without hesitation, his gaze fixed on the iridescent patterns that danced before him. Fen and Zara moved cautiously behind them, their eyes wide with awe as they marveled at the living structure around them. Jay and Elara brought up the rear, their steps measured and wary. The air inside the ship felt charged, alive in a way that made every hair on Jay's body stand on end. He could sense it, an ancient, slumbering consciousness waiting to be awakened. As they ventured deeper into the mothership, the corridors widened, revealing chambers filled with strange, organic machinery. Fen's whispers of wonder echoed through the halls, his scientific curiosity barely contained as he reached out tentatively to touch the pulsating walls. "This is incredible," he breathed, running his fingers over a surface that shimmered like liquid metal. "The biomechanical integration, it's flawless." Zara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's like walking through a dream. The stories my grandmother used to tell, none of them come close to this." Elara watched the interplay between Fen and Zara with a mix of envy and concern. She felt the same wonder, but it was tempered by caution. This place was alien, unpredictable, and they were intruding on something vast and ancient. The child led them unerringly through the labyrinthine corridors until they reached a central chamber. It was vast and circular, dominated by a colossal structure at its heart, a column of crystalline material that pulsed with an inner light. The air here hummed with energy, making their hair stand on end. Fen approached the pillar reverently, his eyes reflecting the kaleidoscopic patterns within. This must be the core," he whispered almost to himself. "The heart of the ship." Jay stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the child. She stood before the pillar, her small form bathed in its radiant glow. Her hand reached out, touching the surface gently. The column responded with a soft resonance that echoed through the chamber. A wave of warmth washed over them all, a sensation of welcome and recognition. Jay felt it deep within him, a primal connection to something far beyond human comprehension. The lights around them brightened, casting intricate patterns on the walls as if celebrating their arrival. It was as if the ship had been waiting for this moment, waiting for them. Elara looked around, her expression softening despite herself. "It's beautiful," she admitted quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the chamber. Jay nodded, a sense of reverence washing over him. This wasn't a hostile entity. It was an ancient being, sleeping peacefully until stirred by their presence. He felt an overwhelming responsibility to honor this moment, to tread carefully and respectfully in this sacred place. As they stood there, bathed in the ethereal glow, the team shared a collective breath of wonder. This was what exploration meant. Stepping into the unknown, finding beauty where none had been seen before, and forging a new path forward. The mothership stirred gently beneath their feet, its lights pulsing softly as if in acknowledgement. Jay looked at his companions, Fen's eager curiosity, Zara's frontier spirit, Kai's steadfast support, Elara's cautious wisdom, and felt a surge of pride. They were pioneers venturing into the unknown with courage and awe. He turned to Elara one last time before stepping forward. "We're making history," he said softly, his voice filled with conviction. She met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the dancing lights around them. "Yes, we are." And so, with a sense of reverence and excitement, they ventured deeper into the heart of the Karru mother ship, guided by ancient whispers and the echoing hum of a slumbering giant welcoming old friends home. Chapter 11. Echoes of betrayal. The organic surfaces of the bridge hummed beneath Elara's feet, pulsating with an inner light that cast eerie shadows through the chamber. The air was thick with a scent both alien and strangely comforting, like ozone after a storm mixed with the faintest hint of blooming flowers. Commander Jay Corbett stood at her side, his expression inscrutable as he scanned the bioluminescent displays that rippled with data streams unlike anything they'd encountered before. The child, Lyra, moved with an uncanny grace through the ship. Her small fingers traced patterns on the walls, and where she touched, the surfaces responded, flaring brighter, shifting colors or emitting soft chimes that seemed to resonate with her movements. She was no longer a lost girl, but a guide navigating familiar terrain. Suddenly, a voice filled the chamber, resonant and clear, yet carrying an accent that spoke of ages past. "Greetings, humans. I have awaited this moment for centuries. Elara jumped slightly, her hand instinctively reaching for Jay's arm before she caught herself and stepped forward. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the sudden pounding in her chest. "I am Karru," the voice replied. "Emissary of the Karru Collective, I have been observing your kind since long before your current civilizations took root." Jay's grip tightened on his rifle, but he didn't raise it. His gaze swept the room, searching for the source of the voice. "Where are you?" he demanded. A soft laugh echoed through the chamber. "I am everywhere and nowhere within this vessel. The ship is an extension of our consciousness, Commander Corbett. You need not fear me." Elara's mind raced. 300 years. It was impossible, yet here they were, standing in a living ship that defied all known laws of physics and biology. "Karru," she began, her tone measured, "why have you waited so long to make contact?" "The Karru are patient beings, Dr. Wynn. We do not measure time as you do. Your centuries are but fleeting moments to us." Elara blinked, taken aback by the formal address and the familiarity with which he spoke her name. "How do you know my name?" she asked. "Your kind has been broadcasting your presence into the void for generations," Karru explained. "We have listened, learned, and waited. The original agreement between our peoples was simple. We would share our knowledge in exchange for access to certain rare elements found within your solar system, a mutually beneficial arrangement." Jay shifted his weight, his voice low and gruff. "What happened?" Karru's response carried a weight of disappointment that hung heavy in the air. "Someone within your government decided otherwise. They sought to exploit our technology without honoring the agreement. The Federation's borders were deliberately weakened, leaving your outer settlements undefended." Elara felt a chill run down her spine. She had dedicated her life to the Federation, believing in its principles of unity and progress. To hear that someone within its ranks could be responsible for such a betrayal was almost unbearable. "Who?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The specifics elude me," Karru admitted. "Factions shift over time as do loyalties, but the result is clear. When we returned to collect what was owed, we found only silence and hostility." Elara's mind reeled. The implications were staggering, not just the potential for war, but the erosion of trust at the core of human civilization. Jay spoke up, his voice steady. "Why now? Why reveal this after all these years?" "There have been changes," Karru said. "Your child here, Lyra, she is a key. Her presence has activated systems long dormant. And there are other factors at play, forces beyond your current understanding." Elara looked at Lyra, who stood quietly amidst the glowing displays, her eyes reflecting the bioluminescent light. The girl seemed unconcerned by the revelation, as if she understood more than she let on. "What do you want now?" Elara asked, her voice firm despite the turmoil within her. "Renegotiation," Karru replied without hesitation. "Not war. We seek to restore balance, to rebuild trust where it has been broken." Jay's expression darkened. He was a soldier, not a diplomat, but he understood the gravity of the situation. "And if we refuse," Karru paused before answering, "then we shall continue as we have, observing, waiting. But know this, the Karru do not forget, and time is on our side." Elara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She thought of the Federation, of the colonies left vulnerable, of the lives lost in the border skirmishes. "What guarantees can you offer?" she asked. "Guarantees are difficult to provide when trust has been so profoundly broken," Karru acknowledged. "But I can offer you knowledge, proof." Elara raised an eyebrow. "Proof of what?" "A tour of this vessel's archives," Karru proposed. "Every agreement made, every promise broken, all recorded here for your perusal." Jay looked at Elara, his eyes reflecting the gravity of the decision. She nodded slowly, understanding the implications. "Show us," she said. The chamber seemed to shift around them, the bioluminescent displays fading and reforming into pathways that led deeper into the ship. Lyra moved forward without hesitation, her small hand outstretched as if pulling an invisible thread. Elara and Jay followed, their steps echoing through the organic corridors. As they ventured further, the walls transformed into vast libraries of data, holographic interfaces displaying timelines, contracts, and communication logs dating back centuries. Karru's voice resonated softly in their minds, guiding them through the labyrinth of information. "Here you will find the first contact," he said. highlighting a sequence of images showing humanoid figures meeting with what appeared to be Karru emissaries on some distant world. And here, the initial agreement signed by your ancestors. Elara's eyes widened as she saw documents bearing seals from long-defunct governments, names she recognized only from history texts. Each agreement was meticulously detailed, outlining exchanges of technology for access to resources. They moved through decades of interactions, technological marvels shared by the Karru, advances in medicine, energy production, and more. And alongside these wonders, evidence of human treachery, covert operations, stolen data, and deliberate misinformation. Elara felt a sinking sensation in her stomach as she read accounts of Federation officials orchestrating the weakening of border defenses. Names flashed before her, some familiar, others obscured by time, but the pattern was clear. Jay's expression grew darker with each revelation. He was silent, but his grip on his rifle tightened, knuckles white. This was not just a political intrigue for him. It was a personal affront to everything he stood for as a soldier. Finally, they reached a chamber filled with holographic representations of recent events. The border skirmishes, the colonists left defenseless, the escalating tensions between worlds. Here too were records of Karru attempts at communication, met with silence or hostility. Karun's voice was soft but firm. "This is our history, Dr. Wynn, the story of a partnership gone awry." Elara felt a profound sense of loss, of innocence, of trust. She had believed in the Federation as an ideal, a beacon of unity amidst the chaos of human nature. To see it tainted by such deceptions was shattering. "And now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now," Karun replied, "you have a choice. You can seek to right these wrongs, to rebuild what has been broken, or you can continue down this path of mistrust and conflict." Jay looked at Elara, his gaze steady. "We need time," he said, "to process this, to discuss it with our superiors." Karun was silent for a moment before responding. "Time is something I have in abundance, Commander Corbett, but know this. The longer you delay, the more lives will be lost on both sides." Elara nodded, her mind racing with the weight of their newfound knowledge. She thought of the Federation, of the people she served, and of the child who stood beside them, a bridge between two civilizations. "We'll need access to our ship," Jay said, "to communicate with our superiors." "Of course," Karun agreed. "You are free to return to your vessel, but remember, Dr. Wynn, Commander Corbett, time is not on your side." The corridors shifted again, guiding them back to the bridge where they had first encountered Karun's voice. Lyra led the way, her steps sure and confident. As they prepared to leave, Elara turned back one last time. "Thank you," she said softly, "for showing us the truth." Karun's response was gentle but insistent. "Remember, Dr. Wynn, the truth is only the beginning. It is what you do with it that matters." With those words echoing in their minds, Elara and Jay made their way back to their ship, leaving behind the living archives of a civilization that had waited 300 years for redemption, and perhaps finding a measure of it within themselves. Chapter 12. The weight of command, the bridge of the horizon's edge, was bathed in a soft, ethereal glow from the holographic displays that pulsed with data streams and navigational charts. Elara Wynn stood at the center, her fingers hovering over the control panel with an almost reverential caution. The room was silent save for the hum of the ship systems and the occasional beep of a diagnostic report. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. Her hand trembled slightly as she entered the authorization code for Federation Administrative Protocol 7 Alpha. The digits seemed to dance before her eyes, each one a step into uncharted territory. 14 times in Federation history this protocol had been invoked, and each time it had left an indelible mark on those who dared to wield its power. She stepped back from the console, her mind racing with the implications of her actions. Her career, already tenuous at best, would likely be shattered by this decision. She knew that. But there was a larger picture at play here, one that transcended personal ambition and pride. Lyra VII hung in the balance, and with it, countless lives. Elara walked to the replicator panel and ordered a cup of tea. The machine whirred to life, depositing the steaming beverage into her waiting hands. She cradled the cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers as she returned to her station. Taking a sip, she felt a small measure of calm wash over her. With deliberate slowness, she began filing the paperwork. Each keystroke was precise, each word carefully chosen. This was not just a formality, it was a testament to her resolve. She included a personal recommendation for approval, knowing full well that it might be ignored or dismissed outright. But she owed it to herself, and to Jay to make her stance clear. As the final transmission was sealed and sent, Elara sat in silence for a long moment. The bridge seemed to hold its breath with her, the hum of the ship systems momentarily muffled by the gravity of her actions. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet envelop her. When she opened them again, there was a newfound determination in her gaze. Commander Jay Corbett stood a few feet away, his expression inscrutable. He had been watching her throughout the process, his eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and solemnity. Jay accepted the authorization with gravity, not triumph. He understood what she had done, the sacrifice she was making. "Let's go to work," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Kai Akaffer nodded at Elara, a nod that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. It was a gesture of respect and solidarity, a silent acknowledgement of her bravery. He stepped forward, his movements fluid and confident as he joined Jay by the command console. "We have our orders," Kai said, his voice steady and clear. Zara Chen looked up from her nav plots, surprise flickering across her features before giving way to a pleased smile. She had always been more of a strategist than a politician, preferring the cold logic of numbers over the complexities of command. But she understood the gravity of Elara's decision and appreciated it nonetheless. Dr. Fenn Walker was too focused on his calculations to process the emotional implications fully. His fingers danced across his data pad, muttering equations under his breath as he plotted atmospheric entry angles and trajectory corrections. He barely acknowledged Elara's action, but his dedication to their mission was unwavering. Elara watched them with a mix of pride and trepidation. These were her people, her team, and she had just given them the power to forge their own path in this crisis. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. Jay turned to the rest of the crew, his voice steady and commanding. "We go in, we find the steering matrix, we take it apart, and we give the Karru a reason to trust us again." The words hung in the air for a moment before the team sprang into action. Kai began coordinating with engineering to prepare the shuttlecraft for entry, while Zara continued refining their approach vectors. Dr. Fenn was already on his way to the lab, his mind fully immersed in the technical challenges ahead. Elara moved with precision as she checked her equipment, ensuring every piece was secure and functional. Her hands trembled slightly again, but settled into a steady rhythm as she methodically went through each item. Communication device, emergency medical kit, and the small tools necessary for their mission. Jay watched her from across the room, his gaze thoughtful. He saw the way her fingers lingered on each piece of gear, the careful deliberation in every movement. There was a strength in her that he had never fully appreciated before, an unwavering resolve hidden beneath layers of analytical thought and strategic planning. It was something he admired deeply, but would never voice aloud. As they prepared to suit up for the mission into the mother ship's core, Elara felt a strange calm settle over her. The weight of her decision no longer pressed down on her like an unbearable burden. Instead, it had become a source of strength. She had made her choice and stood by it, knowing that whatever the outcome, she had acted in the best interests of her crew and the Federation. The team gathered at the airlock, their suits gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Kai gave one last nod to Elara before sealing his helmet, while Zara double-checked her harness with a focused intensity. Dr. Fenn was already inside the shuttlecraft, his fingers still tapping away at his data pad even as he secured himself in his seat. Jay stood beside Elara, his gaze fixed on the dark expanse of space visible through the viewing port. "Ready?" he asked softly, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. She met his gaze steadily. "Ready," she replied, feeling a surge of determination. As they boarded the shuttle and the airlock sealed behind them, Elara felt a profound sense of purpose. She had crossed a line tonight, a line that separated her past from whatever lay ahead, but she did not regret it. This was who she was now, Dr. Elara Wynn, who had dared to invoke Protocol 7 Alpha and empowered Jay Corbett to save Lyra VII. The shuttlecraft rumbled to life, and the horizon's edge receded into the distance as they plunged towards the mother ship's core. The journey ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but Elara knew one thing for sure. Whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together. And so, with a final glance at her crewmates, she steeled herself for what lay ahead, a new horizon on the edge of the unknown. Chapter 13. The unyielding core, the hum of the domed city echoed with a symphony of urgency as Elara Wynn navigated the labyrinthine corridors, her boots clicking sharply against the metal grids beneath her feet. She moved with a purpose that was both calm and insistent, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of chaos that surrounded her. The air was thick with dust, and the scent of ozone from the power conduits that snaked through the walls, carrying whispers of static electricity. Elara's comm unit buzzed intermittently, Zara's voice punctuating the background noise with updates on Jay's progress, or lack thereof. Each report felt like a ticking clock, but Elara kept her focus unblinking. She had trained for moments like this, scenarios etched into her mind during countless simulations aboard the Vigilant. Now, she was finally using that training in the raw reality of New Eden. The colonists, huddled in their sealed sections, watched her with wary eyes. They didn't know her, but they recognized the insignia on her jumpsuit, a Federation emblem tinged with the dirt and grime of their underground existence. Trust wasn't instantaneous. It was earned through the quiet competence she displayed as she coordinated the evacuation. "Section Gamma clear," one of the colonists' leaders, a gruff woman named Mara, reported over the comm. Her voice carried the weight of decades living in the shadows of a failing city. Elara acknowledged with a nod, though Mara couldn't see it. "Good. Move them to Shuttle Bay 3. Kai has the coordinates pre-programmed." Mara grunted affirmatively and relayed the orders to her team. Elara turned to another group, younger faces peeking out from behind makeshift barriers. Their eyes were wide, reflecting the harsh glow of emergency lights. She offered a small smile, more reassurance than warmth. "All right, everyone," she called out, her voice steady and clear. "We've got shuttles waiting at Bay 4. Stay together, keep your gear close, and listen to Mara's team. We're getting you to safety." A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the group. They moved with a surprising alacrity, guided by an unspoken trust in the system Elara had set up. The child, the one who had latched onto her since they started, clung to her hand tightly, small fingers digging into her palm. Elara glanced down at the girl, who looked up with large, dark eyes. "What's your name?" Elara asked softly. The girl hesitated before whispering, "Leela." Elara squeezed Leela's hand gently. "Good name." She started to walk again, pulling Leela along. The child's presence was a constant reminder of the stakes, the lives they were fighting to save. It anchored her more firmly in the moment than any report ever could. As they reached Shuttle Bay 4, Elara noted the precision of Kai's preparations. The shuttles sat like metal eggs nestled within reinforced docks, their engines humming softly. Colonists streamed aboard, guided by volunteers who had stepped up from among them. Elara watched it all with a mixture of pride and relief. She found herself singing an old children's song she didn't remember learning. The tune was soft and lulling, the words fading in and out like distant memories. Leela's grip on her hand loosened slightly as the girl hummed along, her voice barely audible but sweetly resonant. "Elara," Zara's voice crackled over the comm again, this time sharper with urgency. "Jay's team is under heavy fire. They can't hold out much longer." Elara's heart pounded against her ribs, but she kept her voice even. "Hold position, Zara. We're 30 seconds from extraction." She didn't elaborate on what would happen next. The unspoken promise hung in the air. Leela tugged at her hand, pulling Elara's attention back to the present. The girl pointed towards a lone colonist struggling with a bulky pack. Elara nodded and made her way over, scooping Leela up as she went. With the child perched on one hip, she approached the man, whose face was slicked with sweat. "Let me help," she offered, taking the pack from him. It was surprisingly heavy, filled with supplies, tools, food rations, and a small device that looked like an emergency beacon. Elara recognized it instantly. These were the essentials they'd need to survive in Kai's shelters until they could find a new home. "Thank you," he breathed, his voice hoarse from the strain of carrying all this weight alone. Elara handed him off to one of Myra's team members and continued towards the shuttle. Each step felt like a battle won, every colonist safely boarded a triumph. As the last group filed onto the shuttle, Elara stood at the entrance, scanning the bay for stragglers. Leela shifted in her arms, her small head resting against Elara's shoulder. The child's breath was warm and even, a calming presence amidst the chaos. "All clear," Myra reported over the comm. "Bay 4 secure." Elara nodded, though no one could see it. She stepped back as the shuttle doors closed with a hiss of compressed air. Lights flickered on the control panel inside the bay, signaling that all systems were go. "Lift off in 3, 2, 1, she counted down softly, her gaze fixed on the shuttle's window. With a roar, it lifted off the ground, disappearing into the tunnel leading towards open space. She turned to the next bay, but Zara's voice cut through any remaining calm. "Elara," the panic in Zara's tone was unmistakable. Elara tensed, her grip on Leela tightening almost painfully before she realized it and loosened up. "Jay's been hit," Zara continued, breathless. "They need immediate extraction, now." Elara's mind raced through the options, but there were none left to spare. All shuttles were accounted for in their mission. She had one last card to play, a desperate gamble. She ran toward the communications console set up by Kai, Leela still in her arms. The girl clung tighter this time, sensing Elara's urgency. With a few swift keystrokes, she activated an emergency override on the comm system, broadcasting directly through the vigilance channel. "This is Dr. Elara Wynn aboard New Eden," she announced, her voice cutting through static. "Requesting immediate extraction for Team Alpha, Jay, and crew." She paused briefly before adding, "Priority 1. Static crackled back at her, punctuated by Kai's urgent response. "Elara, we're on it. Hold your position." Her comm crackled with urgency from Zara again. The background noise was deafening. "Fighting their way out." There were shouts and clangs of metal against metal in the background, then suddenly Jay's voice, barely audible through a haze of static. "Elara, we're pushing back now," he choked out, his words fragmented but unmistakable. Relief flooded Elara's veins. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling Leela's warm breath against her neck. The child was silent, absorbing the tension like an unspoken promise of safety. "Keep moving, Jay," Elara shouted into the comm, her voice raw with emotion. "We're here." More static followed before Kai's voice cut through again, stronger this time. "Elara, we've got a shuttle en route to your coordinates. Hold tight, we're coming for you both." Elara looked down at Leela and smiled softly. The girl looked back up at her with those dark, trusting eyes. "You did it," Elara whispered, more to herself than the child. "We did it." And in that moment of quiet triumph amidst the turmoil, she realized this was what leadership felt like, standing on the precipice of danger and choosing to step forward anyway because someone needed you to, because sometimes just being present made all the difference. The comm crackled to life again as Kai confirmed their arrival, but Elara didn't need words. She could feel it in her bones. Their escape was imminent. She held Leela close, feeling a sense of purpose that had eluded her for so long. As the shuttle roared overhead and descended into Bay 4, Elara knew they weren't just evacuating colonists. She was reclaiming a part of herself, forged anew in the crucible of New Eden's desperate fight for survival. And when Jay stepped off that shuttle, his face bruised but alive with defiance, Elara Wynn knew this was where she belonged. In the chaos under fire leading from the front, she had found her place in Horizon's Edge, and it was more than just a name on a map. It was home. Chapter 14. Negotiations in orbit. The med bay of the Horizon's Edge buzzed with a subdued hum of activity. Nurses moved swiftly between patients, tending to minor wounds and administering painkillers. Jay Corbett leaned against the doorway, his arm nestled in a sling, watching the scene unfold with a mix of relief and unease. Kai Akaffer lay on a nearby gurney, his face pale but consciousness intact, while Dr. Fen Walker hovered over him, monitoring vitals. Elara Wynn stood in the center of the comms room, her posture rigid yet composed. The holographic interface flickered to life before her, and Karru's imposing figure materialized in the air. His eyes, pools of liquid silver, locked onto Elara with an intensity that felt like a physical force. "Dr. Wynn," Karru began, his voice resonating through the room like distant thunder. "You stand before me now, claiming authority under Emergency Protocol 7 Alpha. Explain yourself." Elara met his gaze unflinchingly. "Karru, I invoke this protocol as an agent of the Federation, bound by its laws and oaths. The original agreement between our species was violated by unknown parties, leading to catastrophic consequences for both the Rim sectors and your kind. We are here to rectify that." Karru tilted his head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost avian in its precision. "Rectification implies restoration to an original state. What you propose is uncharted territory." "Indeed," Elara replied, her tone measured. "But the circumstances demand it. The mother ship's steering matrix has been destroyed, rendering it unable to navigate. This crisis offers us a unique opportunity, a chance to renegotiate terms that benefit both our peoples." Jay shifted slightly in the doorway, his eyes never leaving Elara. He trusted her judgment implicitly, but felt a pang of worry at the weight she carried. Karru considered her words for a moment before responding. "You speak of benefiting both sides, yet your actions have left my vessel stranded. How do you propose to compensate for this disruption?" Elara nodded as if anticipating the question. "Firstly, we will provide immediate medical and technical assistance to stabilize the mother ship. Secondly, we will share our knowledge of advanced propulsion systems, allowing the Karru to develop their own means of navigation independently." Karru's eyes narrowed. "Knowledge is a double-edged sword. What assurances do I have that this information will not be used against us in the future?" Elara held his gaze steadfastly. "The Federation's reputation is built on diplomacy and mutual respect. Our offer comes with transparency and open communication channels to ensure trust. Furthermore, we propose regular exchanges between our scientists and engineers, a collaborative effort to advance technology for both sides." Karru leaned back slightly, his expression inscrutable. "And what of the debt you mentioned? How do you intend to pay it?" Elara took a deep breath, her mind racing through legal precedents and diplomatic strategies. "The debt can be repaid in various forms: resources, technological advancements, and cultural exchanges. We will work together to determine specific terms that are fair and equitable." A flicker of something akin to surprise crossed Karru's features. "You speak boldly for someone who stands before a damaged vessel and injured comrades." Elara didn't flinch. "Boldness is sometimes necessary when faced with unprecedented challenges. The Federation values stability, but we also recognize the importance of adaptability. This crisis can be an opportunity to forge a new path forward." Karru was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting over Elara's shoulder as if seeing beyond her into the chaos that had ensued on both sides of this cosmic divide. "Your proposal is ambitious," he said finally, "but I am willing to consider preliminary talks." Elara allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Jay met her eyes from the doorway, his nod subtle but meaningful. She nodded back, feeling a surge of relief and resolve. "Thank you, Karru," Elara said formally. "I appreciate your willingness to engage in dialogue. When can we begin these talks?" Karru's expression softened marginally. "Tomorrow. I will send coordinates for a secure meeting point on the mother ship." Elara hesitated, then asked, "Would it be possible for me to come alone, to show our commitment without complicating matters with additional personnel?" A pause, then Karru replied, "Indeed. Your presence alone would be a strong gesture of goodwill. Come unarmed and prepared for extensive discussions." Elara nodded solemnly. "I will be there. Thank you, Karru." The hologram flickered and vanished, leaving the comms room in a sudden hush. Elara stood there for a moment longer before turning to face Jay. "Commander," she began, her voice softer now but no less determined, "we have a lot of work ahead of us." Jay pushed off from the doorway and stepped into the room. "You did well, Dr. Wynn, better than anyone could have expected." Elara offered a small smile. "It's not over yet, Commander, but we've taken the first step towards something new. Something hopeful." Jay looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. "Just be careful, Elara. You're walking into territory no one has ever explored before." She nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "I'll be careful, and I'll see you soon, with hopefully some good news." With that, she turned to leave the comms room, her steps echoing with a newfound purpose. Jay watched her go, feeling both proud and anxious for what lay ahead. Back in the med bay, Fen Walker approached Jay as Elara disappeared down the corridor. "You did well by trusting her," Fen said quietly. Jay glanced at Kai, still recovering but stable. It wasn't just about trust. It was about recognizing that sometimes someone else sees a path forward when you can't. Fen nodded. "And now we wait to see if that path leads us back from the brink or deeper into uncharted waters." Jay looked out at the stars through the viewport, thinking of the immense vessel drifting in orbit above Lyra VII. "Either way," he murmured, "we'll face it together." Chapter 15. Echoes of understanding the corridors of the mothership undulated gently, as if breathing in time with some ancient rhythm known only to its alien architects. Dr. Elara Wynn walked cautiously, her heels clicking against the organic floor that seemed to yield slightly under her weight. The air was thick with an odd scent, not unpleasant but distinctly otherworldly, a mix of ozone and something sweeter, like distant blooming flowers. She felt small, dwarfed by the vastness and the alien beauty surrounding her. Karru awaited her in a chamber designed with human physiology in mind. The walls here were smoother, the ceiling higher and the lighting softer, casting a warm glow that mimicked Earth's sunsets. Chairs molded to human proportions stood around a low table laden with refreshments, translucent liquids in vessels that shimmered like polished metal, and solids that resembled fruits but had textures like no plant she'd ever touched. Karru himself was a towering figure, his skin a mottled gray-green that seemed to shift colors subtly as he moved. His eyes were pools of liquid silver, unnerving in their intensity yet strangely calming. He had more limbs than Elara could immediately count, arms that branched into slender digits, and lower appendages that flexed like tentacles. "Dr. Wynn," Karru's voice resonated through the chamber, a deep rumble that vibrated in her chest. "Welcome to the mother ship," Elara nodded, trying to mask her unease with professionalism. "Thank you for having me, Karru. I appreciate the effort made to accommodate human needs." A slight shift in his posture could have been a nod or acknowledgement. "We understand your biology well enough. The Federation's silence has not hindered our observations." Elara took a seat, her back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. "Then you know why I'm here. To open dialogue, to find common ground." Karru settled into his own chair, which seemed to conform to his alien anatomy seamlessly. "Dialogue implies mutual respect. The Federation has shown little of that." Elara met his gaze steadily. "I represent the Federation's interests but not all its actions. I'm here to correct past mistakes and forge a new path." Karru leaned forward, his many-fingered hands splayed on the table. "Your words are empty without action." She took a deep breath, diving into the prepared notes she'd memorized. "Let's start with territory. The Federation acknowledges your claim over the Alpha Centauri system. In exchange, we propose trade, resources from our colonies for technology sharing." A ripple of what might have been amusement crossed Karru's features. "You wish to trade rocks and metals for knowledge that could reshape your civilization." "You underestimate our resources," Elara replied calmly, "and overestimate the simplicity of our offer. We seek advanced medical technologies, sustainable energy solutions, things that can benefit both our peoples." Karru considered this, his silver eyes reflecting the chamber's soft light. "And what of rare elements? We require specific compounds for our own advancements." Elara nodded, expecting this demand. "We have access to asteroidal mining operations rich in those elements. But such resources come at a cost, logistical and technological support that only we can provide." The alien's posture shifted subtly, indicating interest. "A fair exchange, then, but there is more." Elara braced herself. This was the crux of their negotiations, the apology. "Yes," she said softly, "there is more." Karru's voice hardened. 3 centuries of silence, broken promises, and unprovoked aggression. The Federation's actions have caused irreparable harm to our kind." Elara felt a lump form in her throat but pressed on. "I acknowledge the pain inflicted by those actions. I cannot speak for every individual within the Federation, but as someone who values truth and reconciliation, I offer an apology, not just for the breaches of trust, but also for the silence that followed." Karru's expression remained stern. Words mean little without action. Elara leaned forward, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil inside her. And actions mean nothing without understanding. Yes, words are cheap, but they're a start. An apology is not an erasure of history. It's a recognition of wrongdoing and a commitment to change. She took another deep breath, her heart pounding. This was the moment she'd rehearsed countless times, apologizing for sins not her own, yet bearing the weight because it needed to be done. "I am sorry," Elara said, her voice clear and unshaken. "For the individuals who broke our original agreement, for the centuries of silence that followed, for every action taken by my people that caused you harm." Karru's silver eyes flickered, a hint of emotion breaking through his stoic facade. "Your apology is noted, Dr. Wynn, but it is not enough." Elara nodded slowly. "I know it can never be enough to erase the pain and loss you've endured, but it's a beginning, a first step toward rebuilding trust." Karru regarded her for a long moment before speaking again. "And what of those who perpetuated these wrongs? What assurance do we have that they will not repeat their mistakes?" Elara reached into her pocket, pulling out a small device, her personal comm unit. She activated it and Jay's voice crackled through the chamber. "Elara, you're on." His tone was steady, reassuring. "Jay," Elara replied softly, "I want you to know I'm here with Karru. We're discussing terms for peace." There was a pause before Jay responded, his voice tinged with emotion. "We're all with you, Elara. Remember that. Whatever happens, we support your efforts." Elara fought back tears, grateful for the connection. "Thank you," she whispered. Jay's voice faded out, leaving only static. Elara deactivated the comm unit and looked up at Karru. "My crew stands behind me. They understand the gravity of this moment and are committed to ensuring that past mistakes do not repeat themselves." Karru's expression softened slightly. "Your words carry weight, Dr. Wynn, but actions will define our future." Elara nodded. "We agree on a preliminary ceasefire, an end to hostilities. We open formal diplomatic channels, exchange representatives, and begin the slow process of rebuilding trust." Karru extended one of his many-limbed appendages across the table. Elara hesitated briefly before reaching out her smaller hand. His grip was firm yet gentle, his fingers wrapping around hers with surprising delicacy. "This is a start," Karru said, his voice resonating with newfound respect. "A fragile beginning, but one worth nurturing." Elara felt a wave of relief wash over her as she withdrew her hand from the alien's grip. The chamber seemed brighter suddenly, the air less oppressive. She had navigated uncharted waters and emerged with a glimmer of hope. "Thank you," Elara said quietly, "for this chance at peace." Karru stood, his towering form casting a long shadow across the floor. "Peace is never guaranteed, Dr. Wynn, but it is worth fighting for." Elara rose as well, her steps lighter than when she had entered the chamber. As they parted ways, she knew this was just the first step in a long journey, a journey fraught with challenges but illuminated by the possibility of understanding and unity. The corridors of the mothership seemed less alien now, their rhythms almost comforting. Elara made her way back to the docking bay, her mind racing with plans for the future. The exchange of knowledge, the careful navigation of cultural differences, and the constant vigilance required to ensure that this fragile peace endured. As she stepped onto the shuttle, she looked back at the vast ship one last time, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment and gratitude. She had faced an alien entity with pride, practicality, and a wound so profound it could have shattered any hope for diplomacy. And yet, through empathy and moral clarity, she had forged a path toward something unprecedented. The shuttle lifted off, leaving the mother ship behind but carrying with it the promise of a new chapter, one where humans and Karru stood on the precipice of peace, hand in many-fingered grip, ready to step into the unknown together. Chapter 16. Echoes of the mothership groaned around them, a dying leviathan descending through Lyra VII's atmosphere. The air was thick with tension and the hum of activity as the crew moved with purpose, each member absorbed in their tasks. Dr. Fen Walker led his team through the labyrinthine corridors, his eyes scanning the bioluminescent walls like a man possessed. He had spent years studying alien flora and fauna from afar. Now he was immersed in it, surrounded by living structures that pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm. In the bowels of the ship, Fenn's team worked meticulously, collecting biological samples from the organic technology that permeated every surface. They sealed vials filled with luminescent fluids and sliced small sections of the pulsating walls, each sample a piece of a puzzle that could rewrite terrestrial biology textbooks. Dr. Walker himself lingered over a particular chamber, its walls shimmering with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change before his eyes. "What is this place?" he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. His fingers hovered over the glowing patterns, tracing them without touching. Suddenly, one of the patterns flared brighter, and a section of the wall receded, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a crystalline structure, pulsating with an inner light. Fenn's breath hitched as he carefully extracted the crystal. It was warm to the touch, throbbing like a heartbeat. He turned it over in his hands, marveling at its complexity. This wasn't just any biological artifact. It held data, encoded in a way that transcended anything he'd ever seen. This is extraordinary," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant hum of the ship. His mind raced with possibilities, new forms of life, unprecedented genetic structures, and maybe even a key to understanding the Karru's advanced biology. Meanwhile, Zara Chen was deep within the mother ship's data core, her fingers dancing over holographic interfaces that flickered in the dim light. She navigated through layers of encrypted files, each one a testament to the Karru's technological prowess and their distrust of outsiders. Her eyes narrowed as she unearthed another layer of data, this time marked with restriction protocols that sent a thrill down her spine. "Got you," she muttered, cracking open the final encryption barrier. The screen filled with a list of names, dates, and transaction records, evidence of the conspiracy that had led to the original agreement's breach. Human officials, high-ranking Federation officers, and corporate magnates were all implicated, their signatures on documents that detailed illegal trade deals and covert operations. Zara's heart pounded as she began uploading the data to a secure archive. This was it, the smoking gun that could bring down those responsible for the decades of deceit and exploitation. She couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication, knowing that justice might finally be served. Kai Ockhaffer, despite his injuries, moved with grim determination through the ship's corridors. He supervised the installation of the beacon, guiding technicians, as they calibrated its signals to ensure accuracy. The device was a simple yet powerful symbol, a beacon of hope rather than a warning. "You need to get some rest," one of the technicians told Kai, concern etched on his face. But Kai just shook his head, his gaze fixed on the beacon's steady pulse. "No time for that," he replied, his voice steady despite the pain. "This needs to be perfect. It's our promise to the Karru, our way of showing we mean what we say." As they finished securing the beacon, Kai stepped back and looked at it with a sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just about technology. It was about bridging worlds, about giving future generations a chance to rebuild trust where it had once been broken. On the observation deck, Jay Corbett stood beside Elara Wynn, his gaze fixed on the slow descent of the mother ship through Lyra VII's cloud layer. The ship fell gracefully, like a leaf spiraling down from a towering tree, its hull bathed in the amber and gold light filtering through the clouds. Elara leaned against the glass, her hair loose and cascading down her shoulders, a detail Jay noticed but didn't comment on. Her reflection in the window showed eyes that mirrored the shifting colors outside. She was lost in thought, the frontier stretching out before them no longer a distant mystery, but a place of shared history and new beginnings. "I remember when we first arrived," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the ship's gentle hum. "It felt so vast, so untouched. Now, it feels different." Jay nodded slowly, his reflection beside hers in the glass. "Different, yes, but not less beautiful." Elara glanced at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "You're right. It's a place we're learning to remember, not just rediscover." They stood in comfortable silence for a while longer, the ship's descent a silent backdrop to their thoughts. Jay couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride and loss, pride in his crew and what they'd achieved, and loss at the thought of leaving this place behind. "You know," Elara began, her voice barely above a whisper, "when I first joined this mission, I never expected to find this," she gestured vaguely toward the falling ship, "a world so full of life and mystery." Jay's eyes flicked to hers briefly before returning to the view. Neither did I. But it's more than just a world now, it's a part of us. Elara nodded, her gaze distant. I know what you mean, it's like we've left pieces of ourselves here, and Lyra VII. It's become a part of who we are. The observation deck fell quiet again as the mother ship dipped lower into the atmosphere, its lights flickering and dimming with each passing moment. Down below, Kai finished his work on the beacon just as the first of the mother ship systems began to fail. The corridors were now shrouded in shadows, the bioluminescent walls losing their glow. He paused for a moment, listening to the ship's final breaths, the distant hums and creaks, the soft clicks of failing mechanisms. "It's time to go," he murmured, turning away from the beacon with a sense of accomplishment. As he made his way back to the evacuation point, the ship seemed to sigh around him, its once vibrant life fading into quietude. Dr. Fenn Walker emerged from the biological archives, cradling the crystalline structure like a precious artifact. His team gathered around him, their eyes wide with wonder as they watched the last flickers of light die out in the walls. The ship groaned softly, settling deeper into its descent. "We did it," Fenn said, his voice echoing through the dim corridor. "We documented everything." Zara Chen appeared from a side passage, her hands clutching a small data device filled with incriminating evidence. Her expression was a mix of relief and determination as she looked at Fenn and then at Kai. "Let's make sure this wasn't for nothing," she said, her voice steady despite the finality in the air. "We need to get this data back to Lyra VII and expose those responsible." Kai nodded, his gaze sweeping over them all. "Together, whatever comes next, we face it together." As they made their way toward the evacuation point, the ship's lights began to go dark one by one, like a city losing power in slow motion. The once brilliant corridors were now cloaked in shadows, punctuated only by the faint glow of emergency beacons. The sight was both beautiful and sad, a necessary end to an extraordinary journey. Jay and Elara watched from above as the final lights winked out, leaving only darkness and the faint echoes of life within the dying ship. "We should go," Elara said softly, her voice barely breaking through the silence. Jay nodded, his gaze lingering on the now dark hull for a moment longer before turning to her. "Yes, it's time." As they left the observation deck, Jay reached out and gently touched Elara's hand. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the last remnants of the ship's glow. They didn't need words. Their bond was stronger than any speech could convey. Together, they walked away from the mother ship, leaving behind its final descent into Lyra VII's embrace. The crew gathered on the surface, watching as the ship disappeared into the clouds, a silent testament to their shared journey and the hope for a brighter future. As the last traces of light faded, so did the echoes of the mother ship, leaving only the whispers of wind through the trees and the distant hum of life on Lyra VII, an end and a new beginning. Chapter 17. Aftermath. The Vigilant hummed with a gentle rhythm, its engines purring softly as it sliced through the void between stars. The ship was alive but quiet, as if holding its breath after the tumultuous events on Lyra VII. Each member of the crew retreated into their own corners to process the aftermath of their journey, an ordeal that had left them with more questions than answers, and a child who had finally spoken. Dr. Fenn Walker's lab was a stark contrast to the rest of the ship. Instead of the usual sterile order, it was cluttered with test tubes, Petri dishes, and holographic screens displaying reams of data. Fenn paced back and forth, his eyes darting from one screen to another, fingers tapping nervously against his thighs. He had not slept in days, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a gnawing fear that he might miss something crucial. The samples he had collected from the mother ship lay before him like alien relics, each one a puzzle piece in a cosmic jigsaw. His eyes scanned the genetic sequences of the organisms he had found, some familiar, others utterly foreign. The language of these entities was written in codes that defied human understanding, yet Fenn felt an odd connection to them. It was as if they were whispering secrets only he could decipher. He spent hours poring over the data, cross-referencing it with known biological structures and theories, trying to bridge the gap between their world and this new, enigmatic one. The lab's door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing Zara Chen standing in the doorway. Her eyes were sharp and focused, but there was an undercurrent of anger in her stance. "Fen," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "You need to rest." Fen looked up briefly, his gaze flicking back to the screens almost immediately. "I can't. There's too much to do. We've only scratched the surface." Zara stepped into the lab, her presence commanding. "Exactly. And you won't be able to scratch any deeper if you collapse from exhaustion." She moved around the lab, picking up discarded vials and organizing them neatly. "You're chasing ghosts here, Fen. Sometimes the answers come when you least expect it." Fen sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I just need more time." "You've had days," Zara interrupted, "and I can't afford for you to fall apart now. We all need you sharp." She gestured to the child's name etched on the console next to her own holographic keyboard. "Karru." Fen hesitated before turning off a few screens, his gaze lingering on the glowing data points. He sighed deeply and stood up from his chair, stretching his cramped muscles. Meanwhile, Kai Akaffer was in the Vigilance Armory, meticulously cleaning each weapon with an almost ritualistic care. The room smelled of oil and metal, a comforting scent that grounded him after the surreal experiences they'd endured. The child sat beside him on a stool, her eyes following his hands as he disassembled and reassembled the blasters. "Did you know," Kai said softly, "that these weapons have been with us since the first colonization missions? They've seen more stars than any of us." The child tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes curious. She had not let go of him since Lyra VII, clinging to his side as if afraid he might vanish. He found a strange comfort in her presence. "Your hands are gentle," Kai murmured, "yet capable. Like mine." He smiled at her, the warmth in his expression matching the calmness she brought into the room. The child returned his smile with an innocence that made him ache, a reminder of all they had lost and gained. Kai paused when he felt her head lean against his shoulder. Her small frame relaxed, and before long, he heard the soft rhythm of her breath as sleep claimed her. He carefully adjusted their position so she could rest more comfortably on his lap, continuing his work with one hand while cradling her gently with the other. The mess hall was dimly lit at 300, the usual hum of activity replaced by a quiet stillness. Elara Wynn sat alone at a table near the viewport, sipping a steaming cup of coffee. Her eyes were tired but alert, and she laughed softly to herself as she remembered Kai's earlier comment about how their weapons were like old friends, steady and reliable. Jay Corbett entered the mess, his footsteps echoing softly on the metal deck. He spotted Elara and walked over, pouring himself a cup of coffee before sitting across from her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked gently. Elara shook her head. "Too much to think about." She took another sip of her coffee, her gaze drifting to the stars outside the viewport. The galaxy stretched out before them in all its vast, indescribable glory, an expanse both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Jay followed her gaze, his mind wandering back to the mother ship's corridors. He remembered the exact shade of light that had bathed those sterile halls, a soft, otherworldly glow that seemed to shift with every step. It was a memory both haunting and beautiful, etched deeply into his consciousness. "I keep thinking about Karru," Elara said quietly. "What it means for us humanity." Jay nodded slowly. "We've always known there's more out there, but knowing and seeing are two different things." He paused, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "How's your report coming along?" Elara hesitated before responding. "It's coming, I'm just struggling with how to present it. How much to reveal?" Jay leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You've always been honest, Elara. Stick to that. The truth has a way of finding its own path." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow from the viewport. There was something comforting about their shared experience, a bond forged through trials and revelations. They sat in silence for a moment before Jay spoke again. "What do you want to do after this?" he asked softly. "When it's all over," Elara thought for a moment, her gaze distant. "I want to go somewhere quiet," she said finally. "A place with trees and open skies, somewhere I can just breathe." Jay smiled faintly. "Sounds like paradise." "Your turn," Elara prompted. He considered the question carefully before answering. "I've been thinking about my family, about what it means to have roots. Maybe I'll go back to Earth, see if there's still a piece of home left for me." Elara reached across the table, her hand covering his briefly. It was a simple gesture but carried an unspoken understanding, a shared burden and a mutual resolve. "You know," Jay said, breaking the quiet, "I never thought I'd be the kind of person who talks about feelings, but here we are." Elara chuckled softly. "Me neither." She glanced out at the stars again, her voice barely above a whisper. "But sometimes it's just good to sit and breathe." Jay nodded in agreement. "And remember that we're alive, that there's still so much left to discover." Their conversation drifted into lighter topics, memories of places they had been, dreams of where they might go. They talked about music and food, sharing stories from their pasts with a familiarity that felt both new and comforting. As the hours passed, the mess hall remained quiet, bathed in the gentle hum of the Vigilance engines. Outside, the stars continued their endless dance, unaware of the small human drama unfolding within the ship. Jay and Elara sat together in silence for a while longer before finally rising to go back to their quarters. Fen, meanwhile, found himself in his bunk after Zara's firm insistence on rest. His mind still raced with thoughts of alien biology and cosmic mysteries, but exhaustion eventually claimed him. He drifted into a restless sleep, where dreams of genetic sequences morphed into visions of the mothership's corridors. Zara returned to her console, her fingers dancing over the holographic keyboard as she cross-referenced historical records against the archive data. Each match revealed new layers of deception and corruption, fueling her anger but also sharpening her resolve. She would expose the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it made the core world politicians. Kai, with the child still asleep on his lap, finished cleaning the last weapon. He set it aside gently, his gaze lingering on her peaceful face. Her presence was a reminder of all they had gained, of hope and resilience amidst the chaos. He felt a deep sense of protectiveness, a commitment to ensure she grew up in a world where such horrors were no longer hidden. The Vigilant continued its journey through the void, carrying within it a crew who had faced the unknown and returned forever changed. Each member grappled with their own demons, but also found solace in shared purpose and newfound bonds. As dawn broke over an artificial horizon, an illusion cast by the ship's systems, the Vigilant hummed on, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The crew might be battered and weary, but they were united, stronger for having weathered the storm together. And at their emotional center stood Karru, a child who had found her voice and a family in the most unexpected of places. Chapter 18. Shifting tides, the Vigilant docked at the sprawling space station that housed the Federation's central communications hub, a monolith of steel and glass orbiting a gas giant. The chamber of the High Council was vast, a circular arena with tiered seating that ascended like the tiers of an ancient colosseum. At the center stood a dais where holographic projectors hummed softly, ready to display evidence and testimonials from across the galaxy. Dr. Elara Wynn and Commander Jay Corbett stepped into this arena, their footsteps echoing through the silence that preceded the storm. The High Council members sat in rigid rows, their robes adorned with the insignia of their respective worlds. At the head of the table was the council chair, a stern woman named Alia Serafina, her gaze as unyielding as the marble beneath their feet. Beside her, in a seat that seemed suddenly too small for his stature, was High Commissioner Voss, his face pale and eyes darting nervously. Elara felt the weight of the Federation's institutions bearing down on her as she took her place at the witness stand. Behind her, Jay stood like a sentinel, his presence both comforting and grounding. Kira sat in a special chair designed for her size, her small hand clutching Elara's tightly. "Dr. Wynn," Chair Serafina began, her voice echoing through the chamber, "you have provided us with a preliminary report that has shaken the foundations of our government. Please elaborate on your findings." Elara nodded, her eyes scanning the assembled counselors before her. "Thank you, Chair Serafina. My report details the systematic neglect and deliberate obstruction of Rim sector development by certain core world officials. This conspiracy has resulted in the suffering of millions and the near destruction of several colonies." She activated a holographic display that floated above the dais, showing a timeline of events interspersed with data charts, communication logs, and encrypted messages deciphered from Karru's transmission. 20 years ago," she continued, Funding for rim sector development was drastically reduced. High Commissioner Voss, among others, blocked allocations meant for infrastructure, defense, and medical supplies. Voss shifted in his seat, but Serafina silenced him with a sharp glance. Elara pressed on, her voice steady and precise. Communications between Voss and key officials reveal a coordinated effort to divert resources away from the rim sectors. Colonies were left vulnerable, leading to increased pirate activity, resource shortages, and the catastrophic event we recently witnessed. She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to settle over the chamber. The mother ship was not an isolated incident. It was a direct result of decades of neglect. Karru, despite its destructive capabilities, tried to warn us. Its actions were a desperate attempt to force recognition of the rim sector's plight. Elara highlighted specific messages intercepted from Voss's communications. Here, we see directives to suppress reports on colony distress signals. Here, orders to delay medical shipments. And here, she pointed to a particularly damning log, a directive to ignore repeated pleas for aid from the colony at Horizon's edge. The chamber was silent except for the hum of the holographic projectors. Elara looked directly at Voss, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying through the vast space. Commissioner Voss, your actions have cost lives. You have blood on your hands, and it is time to answer for it. Voss's face contorted in a mix of anger and fear, but he said nothing. The silence was more damning than any defense he could mount. Chair Serafina turned to Jay. Commander Corbett, you were present during these events. Your testimony? Jay stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the counselors. I saw what Elara saw, he began simply. Colonies in ruins, people suffering. The Vigilant was sent to Horizon's edge as a last resort. We found a world on the brink of annihilation. Kira, he glanced at the child. She saved us. She warned us about the mother ship. He recounted their journey, his voice steady and true. We fought alongside Karru against the mother ship. It was a battle none of us expected to survive. But we did, thanks to Elara's quick thinking and Kira's guidance. Jay looked at Kira with a softness that belied his tough exterior. The child is not just a survivor. She's a beacon of hope for those colonies. Voss finally broke his silence, his voice trembling with indignation. This is absurd. These claims are unfounded. Serafina cut him off sharply. High Commissioner Voss, your time to speak will come during the investigation. For now, you will remain silent. Jay nodded at the chair and stepped back beside Elara. The council members began to murmur among themselves, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. Chair Serafina raised her hand for silence. Dr. Wynn, she said, your testimony is compelling and well documented. The High Council will convene an immediate investigation into the allegations you've presented. Elara nodded, relief washing over her as the weight of truth began to shift the balance of power. We will also address the Frontier Alliance's demands for reinforcements in the rim sectors, Serafina continued. In light of these events and the imminent threat posed by remnants of the mother ship, we are taking decisive action. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the assembled counselors before settling on Elara. To oversee this transition and ensure the safety and development of our rim territories, we propose the establishment of a new Rim Territories Commission. The commission will be tasked with restructuring resource allocation, bolstering defenses, and fostering sustainable growth in these sectors. Elara's heart pounded as Serafina announced, We nominate Dr. Elara Wynn to serve as the first chair of this commission. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of whispers and surprised murmurs. Elara felt her breath catch in her throat, her mind racing with the implications. She hadn't expected this, she didn't want it, but she knew she couldn't refuse. Jay turned to her, his eyes reflecting the gravity of the moment. Elara, he murmured softly, you have to do this. Kira reached up and took Elara's hand, looking at her with wide, trusting eyes. Elara squeezed Kira's hand gently, feeling a surge of determination. She looked back at Serafina, nodding slowly. I accept the nomination, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within her. But I do so on one condition. Commander Corbett and my team will continue to support me in this endeavor. Serafina nodded solemnly. Agreed. The commission will be granted full autonomy and authority over rim sector operations. Elara stepped down from the dais, Jay beside her. Kira held onto Elara's hand tightly as they made their way out of the chamber. At the doors, Elara paused and looked back at the assembled counselors. "We have a lot of work to do," she said, her voice echoing through the silent room. Outside the chamber, Kai Akafer and Zara Chen were waiting with Fen Walker. Kai's eyes widened as he saw Kira holding Elara's hand. Jay put his hand on Kira's head gently, a small gesture that spoke volumes about their newfound bond. "We did it," Zara whispered, her voice barely audible amidst the quiet hum of the station. Kai grinned, clapping Jay on the back. "You two just changed the course of history." Elara smiled weakly, feeling the weight of her new responsibilities settling over her shoulders like a mantle. "It's going to be a long road ahead," she said, looking at each of them in turn. "But together we can make a difference." Fen Walker stepped forward, his expression serious. "We'll need all hands on deck. The rim sectors are in dire straits, and the mother ship's remnants pose an ongoing threat. But with you leading this commission, Elara, there's hope." Elara nodded, drawing strength from their support. As they walked away from the chamber, Kira looked up at her with bright eyes. "What does this mean for us?" she asked softly. Elara smiled down at the child, squeezing her hand gently. "It means we're going to make things right," she said. "For you, for the colonies, and for everyone who has been left behind." In that moment, Elara Wynn, Commander Jay Corbett, Kira, Kai Akafer, Zara Chen, and Dr. Fen Walker stood united. A family forged in the fires of adversity, ready to face the challenges ahead with unwavering resolve. The corridors of the space station hummed with renewed energy as they made their way back to the Vigilant. The ship was no longer just a vessel. It was a symbol of hope and change. As they boarded, Elara looked out at the expanse of stars before them, her heart swelling with determination. The journey had been long and fraught with peril, but the horizon stretched before them now, vast and full of possibilities. They were no longer on the edges of the Federation. They were at its core, shaping its future one step at a time. And so, under the watchful eyes of the galaxy, Elara Wynn embarked on her new mission, a beacon of hope in the vast expanse of space, guiding the lost and forgotten back to the light. Chapter 19. Symphony of Stardust, the hum of Orbital 7 pulsed through the veins of the station like an arrhythmic heartbeat, a symphony of metal and machinery underpinning the more organic rhythm that throbbed from the jazz club at its core. The club, a sprawling cavern of chrome and velvet, was bathed in a kaleidoscope of colors that danced across the walls and ceiling, casting elongated shadows that swayed with the music. The air was thick with the scent of spilled drinks and the tangy sweetness of synthetic smoke, a heady cocktail that mingled with the warm aroma of bodies pressed together in the rotating dance floor. The quartet on stage was a fusion of old and new, instruments both antiquated and avant-garde. A vintage saxophone wove intricate melodies alongside a synth flute that emitted ethereal tones, while a stand-up bass thrummed deep, resonant notes that vibrated through the soles of Jay's boots. The drummer, a lanky alien with tentacle-like limbs, kept time with a precision that bordered on hypnotic, his sticks clicking and clacking against surfaces both metallic and organic. Jay leaned against the bar, elbows resting on the cold surface as he watched the band. His gaze followed the arc of the saxophonist's fingers over the keys, the way the synth flautist's breath seemed to coax notes from the air itself. Beside him, Elara's presence was a gentle warmth, her shoulder brushing against his arm in a casual intimacy that felt both natural and profoundly significant. The crowd was a tapestry of species and cultures, each face etched with stories of survival and resilience. Dock workers in grease-stained overalls danced alongside corporate types in sleek suits, their movements synchronized by the beat but individualistic in expression. A group of miners, their skin rough and calloused from years under the asteroid's surface, laughed loudly as they clapped along to the rhythm. Zara Chen, perched at a corner table with a drink in hand, watched Jay and Elara with an amused twinkle in her eye. Her smile was knowing, a secret shared without words. She raised her glass slightly in their direction before taking a sip, her gaze never leaving them. Kai Akafer, on the other hand, was lost in the music, his body moving with a fluidity that belied his usually stoic demeanor. He danced with a group of dock workers, his laughter echoing through the crowd as he spun and twirled, unconcerned with anything but the moment. Jay couldn't help but feel a surge of affection for his friend, grateful for the unspoken understanding that passed between them. In the back of the club, tucked into a booth draped in plush velvet, Kira slept peacefully. Her small form was swaddled in an old jacket of Jay's, the fabric worn soft from years of use. The sight of her, so innocent and at ease, brought a tightness to Jay's chest. He felt Elara's fingers brush against his hand, a silent acknowledgement of their shared responsibility and the quiet joy of this stolen moment. The music swelled and ebbed like the tides of an unseen ocean, each note resonating through the room with a power that transcended sound. The stand-up bassist plunked out a series of deep, mournful notes that seemed to echo the vastness of space itself, while the saxophone wailed a haunting melody that spoke of loss and longing. Yet there was hope in it too, a defiant optimism that cut through the sorrow like a beacon. Elara turned to Jay, her eyes reflecting the kaleidoscope of colors from the stage lights. There were no words exchanged between them. None were needed. The look they shared was a conversation in itself, a dialogue of unspoken feelings that had been building for weeks. The touch of their hands was a confession, a promise whispered in silence. Jay's fingers closed around Elara's, her skin warm and smooth against his calloused palm. He could feel the pulse at her wrist, steady and rhythmic, matching the beat of the music. Her head leaned gently against his shoulder, a weight he welcomed without hesitation. The warmth of her breath on his neck sent a shiver down his spine, a sensation that was both comforting and exhilarating. The band reached a crescendo, the saxophone and synth flute weaving together in a duet that soared above the thunderous drums and throbbing bass. The crowd cheered, their voices merging into a single roar of approval as the musicians played with an intensity born of shared history and mutual respect. Jay felt Elara's body press closer to his, her fingers tightening around his hand. As the final note hung in the air, the audience erupted in applause. Jay and Elara remained exactly where they were, caught in their own world amidst the chaos. The music faded to a gentle hum, replaced by the murmur of conversations and laughter. Kai made his way back to them, wiping sweat from his brow with a grin. "Did you see that?" he asked, gesturing towards the stage. "That last bit pure magic," Jay nodded, his voice low. "Incredible." Zara joined them at the bar, her eyes still twinkling with amusement. She clinked glasses with Kai, then turned to Jay and Elara. "Well, that was a show," she said softly, her gaze lingering on their entwined hands. Elara smiled, a soft curve of her lips that seemed to light up her entire face. "It was perfect," she murmured. Kira stirred in the booth, her eyes fluttering open as she looked around, disoriented for a moment before recognition dawned on her face. She yawned widely and stretched, then shuffled over to Jay, who scooped her up with an easy grace. "Hey, little one," he said softly, rubbing her back gently. "Did you sleep well?" Kira nodded, snuggling into his chest. Her small hand reached out to touch Elara's arm, a silent invitation that brought a tender smile to the doctor's lips. The three of them stood there for a moment, a small island in the sea of revelers. The club began to wind down, the energy shifting from exhilaration to contentment. Jay felt an ache in his chest, a bittersweet longing for this moment to last forever. He tightened his grip on Kira and Elara, as if he could hold on to them both physically and emotionally. As they made their way out of the club, Jay glanced back at the stage one last time. The band was packing up their instruments, their movements weary but satisfied. The lights dimmed gradually, casting long shadows that stretched across the dance floor like spectral dancers frozen in time. The corridor outside the club buzzed with residual energy, voices echoing off the metallic walls as people drifted towards other parts of the station. Jay, Elara, Kira, and Kai walked in silence, their steps synchronized but thoughts unspoken. They passed through a series of airlocks and corridors, each one leading them closer to their quarters. At the door to their living space, they paused. Jay looked at Elara, her face bathed in the soft glow of the corridor lights. Her eyes held a depth of emotion that he couldn't quite fathom, but it made his heart race. He leaned forward slightly, almost imperceptibly, and felt her breath hitch. Time seemed to slow as they stood there, inches apart, the weight of their unspoken feelings hanging between them like an electric charge. Jay's hand tightened around Kira's, a silent anchor in the swirl of emotions. Elara's fingers brushed against his cheek, a touch so gentle it was almost ethereal. And then, on a held breath that didn't get released, they stepped through the door into the quiet sanctuary of their home. The noise and lights of the jazz club faded behind them, leaving only the echo of music and the promise of what might come next. Chapter 20, End Credits, End of Audiobook Horizon's Edge. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please like and subscribe.